Today is the awakening ceremony for the village children's job classes, and people had incredibly high hopes for Errol since his mom was a high-class sword princess and his dad was an archmage, so he is bound to get something good. However, when it's his turn to be touched by the priest, instead of seeing visions of his job title, all he sees is the color white. The priest is stunned because this almost never happens, but in cases like this, it could only mean one thing. The priest announces that just like a disappointed college graduate in the job market, Errol is going to be chronically unemployed. Classes are blessings bestowed on an individual that allow you to specialize in a job and acquire skills to improve yourself, so it's a really big deal. His parents and sisters spent all morning glazing the hell out of Errol because they thought you would receive a legendary class, so imagine how shocked they were to hear that he is due to be jobless. But regardless, they do still love their boy, so they start canceling their retirement plans and tell Errol that he can just mooch off of them and live in their basement for the rest of his life if he wants. However, Errol says he has no interest in becoming a basement dweller. Everyone seems to think he's going to become a bum since he's classless, but he honestly doesn't think it's a big deal. Sure, it would have been nice to have gotten a cool job that would make him strong immediately, but he has still been learning how to use a sword with his mom for years at this point, and the fact that she hasn't accidentally killed him with her overwhelming force yet must mean he has been getting better, so he's not discouraged. Even if it's going to take more work than usual to achieve the same results as others, he's willing to keep trying until he becomes just as strong as his parents. Errol's family members are all happy to see that he hasn't lost hope yet, so they start glazing him, saying he will definitely become famous in the future. And Errol appreciates it, but he really needs to get back to training, so he heads out into the fields by himself. There he hears the sound of swords clashing nearby, so he goes to check it out and spots two children from the village in the middle of a duel to test out their new sword classes. Soon enough, one of the boys notices Errol watching them from the corner over there, and they ask him what he's doing here since this isn't a place for a classless loser like him. Errol says there are no rules against him coming here to train, so he'd just like to practice in peace. But the kids seem really intent on establishing dominance over Errol, so they say they'll be nice and show him what a sword-class wielder can do. The two of them begin sparring with one another again in front of Errol. He is kind of impressed. Don't get me wrong, their technique is laughable at best, but Errol does think it's intriguing how effective sword skills really are. The first skill anyone with a sword class receives is called basic swordsmanship, and it allows you to swing a sword decently well even if you've never held one in your life, which is clearly the case for these two. He thinks he might actually be able to get some good practice if he goes up against them, so he interrupts and says he'd like to have a duel with them. The kids are offended by the fact that Errol thinks he would stand a chance against them even though he's classless, so they'd agree to the match, but just to make sure, the first kid asks Errol if he has his divine protection. A divine protection is a blessing that everyone in this world is born with, and it basically creates a shield around your body to absorb damage up to a certain extent. Errol informs them that he does have a divine protection, and the boys are relieved to hear that since it means they don't have to worry about accidentally killing Errol during their duel. The first one steps up and charges at Errol, fully expecting to overwhelm him with his initial strike, but to his surprise, Errol is actually holding his ground really well. No matter what he does, he can't find a single weakness in Errol's technique to exploit. He signals for his friend to come over so they can jump Errol, but he sees it coming and jumps out of the way in time. Mostly because the second kid was yelling during his sneak attack. The swordsman class may have given them decent sword skills, but it can't do anything about plain old stupidity, so these two wouldn't be able to come up with a decent attack plan even if their lives depended on it. Either way, he thinks this is a great opportunity to challenge himself by fighting two opponents at once, so he charges towards them, but within seconds he has already knocked them out, and it wasn't as hard as he thought it would be. Any reasonable person would have admitted defeat here, but the boys say they haven't lost yet because, nah, that one didn't count. Just then, a red-haired child shows up, and he tells the two of them to stop whining because on a real battlefield, there are no second chances. Red hair seems to be pretty well known since the boy don't bother arguing with him, and as he walks up to Errol, he tells him that his skill with a sword is remarkable for a classless bum like him. But the only reason he won that match was because he was up against those weaklings, so now Red Hair wants to fight Errol to prove that he is superior. The boys inform Errol that Red Hair is the son of Captain Evans, the village's head guard, and Errol happens to know Evans since he used to show up at their house every so often to ask Errol's mom to help him hunt demons. But to be honest, Red Hair looks nothing like Evans, so Errol briefly considers calling him adopted, but he doesn't want to make him any angrier than he already is. Redhead is only doing this because he thinks his father is the greatest, but everyone else in the village says Errol's mom is stronger, which is true by the way, but Redhead can't accept that. He wants to make it clear that he isn't lazy like those two over there. He awakened his sword skills a year ago and has never skipped a single day of training, So even though he is young, he has already attained some intermediate level sword skills. He believes the skills of parents are inherited by their children, so he is here to prove once and for all that his dad is the best by beating Errol. But Errol calls him out on his BS, because none of what he said made any sense. He's obviously just angry that Errol's mom can beat up his dad, and he's trying to take it out on him, but Errol is always down for a good challenge, so he accepts the duel. The duel begins shortly after, and the two start clashing blades with incredible speed. The other two boys watch on from the sidelines, and they are astonished by the fact that Errol is able to keep up with an intermediate swordsman like Redhead. After fighting for a few minutes, Errol can tell that Redhead is a lot stronger than the other two, but his anger is clouding his judgment, so after one wide swing, Redhead is left completely open, and he plans to take full advantage of that. He closes the distance and aims for Redhead's neck, but at the last second, Redhead uses one of his skills to counter. Errol manages to block the initial strike, but the second slash hits him in the gut and sends him flying into a brick wall. Redhead is surprised that Errol actually managed to block one of the slashes at such close range, but he still got hit in the end, so it's Redhead's victory. Errol asks for an explanation, so Redhead tells him that what he just used was called Twin Blade, and it is an attack skill that allows him to perform 2 strikes in one swing. He admits that Errol is way better than he thought he would be, and he respects him for it, but there's no way someone who is classless like him would ever be able to defend against a sword skill like that. However, Errol takes that as a personal challenge and swears he will find a way to overcome it. A few days later, Errol's sister comes into his room to wake him up, but he really isn't much of a morning person, so he just ignores her and goes back to sleep. However, Astaire then threatens to kiss him if he doesn't wake up, and that's enough to get him out of bed. They both head to the kitchen to grab some breakfast, and Astaire is still trying to kiss Errol, but his mom doesn't seem to mind since it's not incest if you're not blood related. However, in this case, those two really are blood related, so this is definitely incest. Once everyone has had their meal, Astaire asks Errol if he plans to go to his special training session again today, and he confirms it, but she doesn't understand why he has been pushing himself so hard lately. She tells him he should take a break every once in a while, but Errol doesn't plan on resting until he has become the best, so once he's done with breakfast, he heads out to continue his training. Astaire is starting to get really worried about him since he's been coming home late every day since he got beaten up at the training grounds, but Farah is sure that Errol is capable of taking care of himself, so there's no need for them to worry. She takes Astaire out back and shows her a chest full of broken swords. These are all the blades that Errol has been using to train, and you can tell by how worn out they all are that Errol is putting a lot of effort into getting stronger, so they should let him work as hard as he wants to. Meanwhile, out in the forest, Errol is using a tree to test out his new move since he thinks he has finally perfected it. He had to let the redhead hit him with it a lot so he could figure out how it works, but he eventually got it down, so he can use Twin Blade Slash at will now. All this while, a goblin has been watching Errol from the bushes, and even though it just saw what Errol is capable of, it uses the logic of my ranked teammates and decides to attack him alone. Errol spots the goblin and easily slashes it across the chest before its body could even hit the ground. Just then, Errol hears the growl of a large monster somewhere else in the forest, and it sounds pretty big, so he's about to retreat to call for backup. But just as he is about to leave, he hears the voice of a kid being attacked by the monster. He doesn't have time to call for help anymore since it might be too late to save the kid by the time he returns, so instead he charges forward to handle it himself. He eventually arrives at the spot where he heard the screaming, and he finds Redhead pinned up against a tree by a hobgoblin. He is severely injured, so Errol needs to save him, but he can't rush in carelessly since the hobgoblin is still a major threat. He patiently waits while the monster closes in on Redhead, and just as it's about to finish him off, Errol sees an opening, so he hits it with a twin-bladed slash, killing it instantly. Redhead is still badly injured, so Errol shares some of his standard issue holy water with him so he can recover. He feels a lot better now and thanks Errol for sharing his holy water, but now that that's out of the way, he demands to know how the hell Errol managed to do that. Twin and Slash is a complex move that can only be achieved by using a skill. Errol admits that it definitely is complex, but all he needed to do was figure out the patterns and timing, and he was able to replicate it pretty easily. In fact, he should probably be thanking Redhead since it's only because he kept using it over and over that Errol was able to figure out how to perform the technique. Redhead can't believe it, but even if Errol was able to replicate the technique without his skill, he is still certain that his skill-based attack must be stronger, so he asks Errol to have another sparring match with him right here. The two face off against each other, and just as expected, Errol is able to match Redhead's twin slash. But not only that, he even goes a step further and throws in a third slash which catches Redhead off guard and knocked him off his feet. It's called Twin and Slash for a reason. so it should be possible for him to launch 3 slashes at the same time. But since Errol isn't using a skill to perform the slashes, so there's no real limit on how many he can perform. Redhead is floored at the realization that Errol is simply better than him, and Errol walks away confident that he has asserted his dominance. A few days later, Errol is having dinner with his family, and Farah mentions that Evans' child has decided to go to Brescia, the city of swords, to train for some reason. Errol realizes he's probably the reason the redhead suddenly decided to leave town for training, but the city of swords sounds pretty interesting, so he is considering heading there as well. A few years later, Errol eventually decides to jump on a carriage headed for Brescia, and in that same carriage he meets a man and a woman headed there as well. The man is a barbarian and the woman is a dual sword wielder, so she asks the man to team up with her, but he immediately declines since he hates working with people who fight with flashy clothes on. The woman gets offended and tells the man that her class is focused on speed and evasion, so there's no reason for her to bother getting any heavy armor. Plus, this dress comes in handy since most of her opponents would be too busy staring at her opai to fight properly. The two are about to launch into a full-blown argument over this, but all of a sudden, the driver interrupts to tell them they both have amazing advanced classes, and he'd really appreciate it if they could put those classes to use right now, because they are in a bit of trouble. The two look forward and realize that the path is being blocked by a horde of orcs, and there's no way to get around them. The barbarian immediately starts freaking out because it'd take an entire party to handle a horde this large, and he knows damn well that he doesn't have what it takes to solo them, so he pushes past the helpless mother and son in the carriage and hightails it out of there. The dual wielder also runs off since she has no intention of risking her life for others, so it looks like everyone else in the cart is doomed, or at least that would have been the case if Errol weren't here. He runs out to confront the horde and begins cutting them down one after another. The driver is impressed because he can tell that Errol just used the blink step skill, and it is an incredibly versatile skill, but it's practically useless if the user gets surrounded, so he wonders what Errol plans to do in this situation. As the orcs close in on him, he begins spinning around as he executes quick and efficient slashes, and the driver can't believe what he's seeing because Errol is clearly using the sword dance skill, but that's a skill exclusive to the Sword Princess class, and that class can only be obtained by women. Shortly thereafter, Errol stabs the Orc King in the head, putting an end to the battle, and all the others are incredibly thankful for his hard work. Once he returns, the kid in the back asks Errol what class he has because his skills are amazing, but everyone is shocked to find out that he doesn't have one. 5 years ago, after Errol first learned how to use the twin blade skill, his mother had trouble believing what she saw at first. She had completely convinced herself that Errol was doomed to be a bum for the rest of his life because he was classless, but he explains that he is able to naturally learn skills through practice and hard work. On that note, he asked her if she'd be willing to show him some of her Sword Princess skills, so if he could try learning those, and after that, he'd like to head to Brescia to train for a while. However, his mother wasn't really paying attention to most of what he said because she was so overjoyed by the fact that her son isn't going to be a loser after all, so she ran inside to tell the others. Back to the present, the carriage has just arrived at the gates of Brescia, so the driver wakes Errol up and tells him they've arrived at his destination. There are a lot of swordsmen here, as well as many other advanced classes, so Errol could probably learn a lot here. But before he leaves, he asks the driver if he has an advanced class as well. He tries to avoid the question by reiterating that he's just a driver, but a regular driver wouldn't have been able to accurately identify Errol's sword skills so easily, so there's clearly something special about him. The driver eventually admits that he actually possesses the Holy Knight class, but he occasionally works as a driver to take a break from all the fighting that comes with his job. He can tell that this is Errol's first time in a big city, so he advises him to go join one of the guilds as soon as he can. Most of the swordsmen here live off winnings from the battle tournament, and you can't join the tournament without a guild. Although he warns Errol to be careful about which guild he joins because there can be some nasty ones out there. After the driver leaves, Errol heads into the city to find a guild to join, and a bunch of them seem to be recruiting, but he wants to make sure he picks the best one. All of a sudden, a blonde girl sneaks up behind Errol, and she attempts to bump into him so she has an excuse to start a conversation. But Errol's too good for that, so she ends up face-planting into the concrete. She can't believe he actually managed to avoid her without even looking, but that just means he must be really talented, so she gets up and says she has an offer for him. Basically, she asks Errol to join her guild and pulls out an enrollment contract for him to sign, but he immediately tells her he's not interested. Sure, he wants to join a guild, but if she's using desperate tactics like this, then her guild must suck big time. Errol was completely right about the girl's guild, but she still wants him to join, so she offers to go on a date with him if he agrees to join, but Errol tells her she's just as flat as his sister, so he has no interest in going out on a date with her. He then gets ready to leave, but before he does, he asks her if she can point him in the direction of a guild that's actually good. The girl can't believe Errol is really asking her for directions after calling her guild trash, but she's a nice person, so she tells him the best guild around here is the Black Blade Guild, and their building is over there. Errol follows her directions and eventually finds the Black Blade Guild office, but there's a long line out front of people who want to join, so he's going to have to wait a while. Once it's his turn, the clerk tells him that he will need to register for an aptitude test to join, and to take the test, he needs to have an advanced class. However, when Errol tells him that he is classless, the clerk practically bursts out in laughter and tells his bum to get out of line because he's never going to be allowed to take the test as a classless loser. Errol asks him if he could make an exception just this once since he's sure he'd be able to pass the test if they let him take it, but the clerk tells him rules are rules, so Errol is forced to leave. He then proceeds to attempt to apply to every guild in the city, and unfortunately, the advanced skill of lying to the recruiter doesn't work here since as soon as they checked his card and found out he was classless, they all rejected him. It's clear that no guild is going to accept Errol at this rate, but then he recalls that his mom wrote him a recommendation letter before he left. She told him that if he took it to Reformer Guild, then they'd definitely let him join, so Errol decides to start searching for the place. Just then, Lilia comes up to him again and asks if he's willing to join her guild now, but Errol still has no interest in working with her. She begs him to reconsider since her guild is on the verge of being disbanded since they don't have enough members, but Errol says that's not his problem. Lilia is getting really desperate here, so she gets down on the ground and starts begging Errol to just join. She even offers to lick the dirt off his boots if he agrees to it. But by the time she looks up, Errol is already gone, and the crowd of people nearby is laughing at her pitiful display. Errol has been walking for a while now, and he should be close to his mom's old guild by now, but he's not sure which building it is. Just then, Lily shows up again and asks Errol to at least come visit her guild since it's really close by. In fact, she can see it from here, so she points over at the building, and Errol is surprised because it actually looks pretty nice. He asks why Lilia is so desperate to get new members if the guild is so well established, and essentially, Lilia's guild used to be famous, but a lot of stuff happened, and now it's a shell of its former glory. In fact, they are pretty much the weakest out of all the guilds right now, but she assures Errol that the Dragon Fang Guild will rise to the top again. Errol is shocked to find out that Lilia's guild is called Dragon Fang, because that's also the name of his mom's former guild, so this is a huge coincidence. He is no longer opposed to listening to Lilia's proposal, so he follows her inside and she leads him to the waiting room so they can discuss things. However, her dad happens to be in here, and he's an absolute mess right now. He notices that Lilia brought another newbie to sign up, but he tells Errol that he shouldn't waste his time here because this guild is done for. He then walks out before Lilia has a chance to say anything to him, so she explains to Errol that her dad used to be one of the top 2 swordsmen in Brescia, but he hasn't been the same since the day he lost his arm. She is sure that seeing the guild leader in such a pitiful state must have made Errol lose faith in the Dragon Fang Guild, but to her surprise, Errol says he'd still like to join. She asks him if he's sure he really wants to join them, but it's not like any other guild would accept him, so this is his only option. That's good enough for Lilia, so she pulls out the enrollment contract and gives it to Errol so he can sign. Once that's done, Errol is officially a member of the Dragon Fang Guild, but Lilia realizes that she never actually asked him what his class was, so she looks at the form Errol filled out and sees that he wrote classless down. At first, she thinks Errol must be joking, so she asks him to take this a little more seriously, but he tells her he is being dead serious and even shows her his ID as proof. Lilia goes silent after realizing that Errol really is classless, and then she proceeds to threaten to beat him up unless he rescinds his contract right now. Errol calmly asks her why, but it's common sense that no guild would want a classless nobody among their ranks. She was so happy to have finally found a new member for the guild, but if Errol really is classless, then he's going to be useless in the tournament. So what's she going to do? Just then, the guild's other member, Lena, happens to walk in and Lilia goes crying to her about how the new guy turned out to be classless, but as soon as she hears the word classless, she knows exactly who Lilia must be talking about. She asks Errol what he's doing here, but Errol says he doesn't have to explain himself to a stranger. Lena can't believe Errol doesn't remember her after all that time they spent training together in the village, but he still insists that he has never met her before because he would remember training with someone as beautiful as her. Lena gets flustered by Errol calling her beautiful, but now that he thinks about it, he does recall training with someone who had the same red hair as Lena, but that was Captain Evans' son. Lena tells Errol that Evans only ever had a daughter, and that daughter is her, so he now realizes that she really was the redhead he trained with back then. He apologizes for not recognizing her, but in his defense, she looks really different now, And as he says this, he is making direct eye contact with her Opie. She has been training here for the past 5 years to make sure she'd never lose to Errol again, and since he's here, she challenges him to a friendly match so she can show him how much she has grown. Errol is always ready for a fight, so the two head to the training center, and as the match begins, Lena launches a twin blade slash at him. Errol attempts to counter with a twin slash of his own, but as the slashes collide, Lena's attack still manages to hit him. He doesn't understand what just happened, so Lena explains that while he may be able to copy her skill, she has gotten a lot stronger thanks to her training, so her attacks are at least 5 times stronger than his. Errol is impressed by how much Lena has grown, but if strength is her main advantage, then he just needs to avoid getting hit. Lena charges in to attack again, but when she strikes at Errol, he dodges her attack so fast that it leaves an afterimage. She recognizes this as the Supreme Shadow Sword skill, and she can't believe Errol managed to learn something like that on his own, but he basically just learned how to move really fast. Now there's no way Lena can lay a finger on Errol, and soon after, he knocks her out by countering one of her attacks and redirecting the force back at her. Errol is clearly the winner of the duel, and Lena tries to act like it doesn't bother her, but she starts bawling her eyes out as soon as she leaves the room because she can't believe Errol is still stronger than her after she spent 5 years training. Errol and Lilia decided to give Lena some time to cool off, so they head back to the meeting room, and once they're there, Errol asks Lilia for a little more detail regarding the guild's situation. Long story short, she explains that their guild is in a lot of debt, and they need to win the next tournament to get enough money to pay it off, but at least 3 members are required to participate, which is why she was so desperate to get someone to join. Given the circumstances, Errol wonders why Lena chose to stick around this long, so Lilia explains that when Lena first arrived in the city, all the big guilds rejected her because they didn't want to have to train a kid, but Lilia's dad took her in spite of her age, and ever since then, she has been a loyal member of the guild. Anyway, regarding the guild's current situation, Errol doesn't think they need to worry too much since everything will be resolved as long as they win the tournament. Granted, they'll have to fight teams of 5 with a team of only 3, but he enjoys a good challenge. The next morning, Errol wakes up and meets with Lena and Lilia to discuss the next step for the guild, and now that everyone is here, Lilia announces that since Dragon Fang has finally acquired 3 members, they have enough people to participate in the team battle, so they will be entering the guild competition this weekend. She goes on to explain that the tournament is organized in one-on-one elimination rounds, and each team is limited to a maximum of 5 members. Lena is a little worried since they'll be going in with only 3 members, but Lilia assures her that it shouldn't be too hard since she and Lena are both B rank, so as long as they don't get set up against an A ranker, they should be fine. This is the first time Errol is hearing of this ranking system, so Lilia gives him a quick rundown and explains that there are a total of 4 ranks detailing the strength of an individual swordsman. Out of the 500 swordsmen in Brescia, there are only around 20 who are classified as A rank, while Lena and Lilia fall in B rank. Errol isn't ranked yet, but since he was able to beat Lena, Lilia assumes he must be at least B rank as well, so as long as they don't get unlucky with the match placements, they have a decent shot at winning. Speaking of which, the match brackets should have been posted on the Colosseum's notice board by now, so Lilia says she's going to take a look at them right now. In the meantime, Lena gets up to go do some training until Lilia gets back, but before she could leave, Errol calls her back because he has a favor to ask. First of all, since she's a power bladesman, he asks if she has any other skills aside from simple brute strength, and she responds, telling him that she has a skill called Guts, which essentially makes her divine protection last longer than usual. Errol gives it some serious thought and comes to the conclusion that the Guts skill would be an incredible asset to him in battle, so he goes up to Lena and asks her to hit him over and over. Lena starts blushing and asks if they can try something a little more normal since she thinks Errol is asking to do something really kinky, but he says she's misunderstanding him. The reason he wants her to hit him is because he assumes the Guts skill is just an ability that raises your endurance, so the best way for him to reproduce it would be by learning to take hits without using his divine protection. Lena is shocked when she hears Errol's plan and calls him crazy because everyone knows skills are blessings from the goddess that are dependent on your class, but Errol reminds her that she has already seen him recreate the Twin Blade and Shadow skills, so who's to say he can't replicate the Guts skill as well? To prove it, he asks her to hand over her sword for a second, and she agrees to give it to him. But she doesn't understand what he intends to do with it, since this thing was custom made to be 5 times heavier than a regular sword, so there should be no way he could handle it without the brute strength skill. However, Errol proves her wrong by effortlessly unsheathing and swinging the blade around. She asks how he's doing that, so he explains that while the brute strength skill does make you stronger than normal, so does dedicated training, and Errol has been diligently working out for years now. Lena admits that she was wrong and agrees to help Errol with his training, but she warns him that if he wants her to hit him, then she won't be holding back and she doesn't want to hear any complaining afterwards. A few minutes later, Lily comes running home with some terrible news. She just checked her tournament bracket, and of all the teams that they could have fought, the organizers set them up against the Black Blade Guild, and those guys have 8 A rankers on their team. Even so, Lilia still remains confident that she and the others will be able to come out on top, but now that she's done with her speech, she realizes that Lena has been beating Errol up for a while now. Lena defends herself and says he was the one who asked her to do this, and despite his severe injuries, Errol doesn't seem all that bothered, so he gets up and asks what's for lunch. The day of the guild competition finally comes around, and once the group arrives for their match, they overhear a pair nearby talking about how unlucky Dragon Fang was to be matched with Black Blade. They remember that Dragon Fang used to be one of the top guilds, but they aren't willing to risk their money on some underdogs, so they are betting it all on Black Blade. Lilia is offended that those guys think Dragon Fang is going to lose, so she starts heading over there to give them a piece of her mind, but Lena holds her back because it's not worth getting in trouble over. Errol couldn't care less about whether the people believe he will win or not, but he's surprised to find out that gambling is allowed here. Lena explains that all matches at the Colosseum can be bet on, and as things stand, the odds on their match are 20-1. Lilia is mad because that means no one expects them to win, but she says this could be a great opportunity to make even more money. If they don't win, their guild will be screwed either way, so she decided to take out another loan using their building as collateral so she could bet on their match. And Errol now understands how the guild got into so much debt in the first place. Just then, Lilia hears a man laughing at her from behind, so she turns around to see who it is, and to her annoyance, she finds Jorg, the guildmaster of Black Blade, standing there. She asks him what he wants, so Jorg tells her he's just here to wish them luck since he hates seeing how his former rival guild has fallen on rough times. He even heard that they were desperate enough to accept a classless loser as a member. Lilia tells him that's none of his business, but Jorg says he went through a lot of trouble to make sure their guilds would be facing each other in the tournament, so of course he'd want to know who Dragon Fang has on its roster. Lilia can't believe Jorg rigged the matches just so he could fight Dragon Fang, but he says he's actually doing them a favor since going up against a popular guild like Black Blade has garnered a lot of attention for them. So they stand a chance of earning a lot of money if they win. But that's only if they manage to pull off a miraculous victory against Black Blade's A rankers. A little while later, it's time for today's main event, so Errol and the others walk out into the arena. They take a look at the list of combatants for Black Blade, and Errol is surprised that the guildmaster didn't join in since he seemed personally invested in crushing them in this match. He wonders if Jorg might be taking it easy on them, but Lilia and Lena point out that Black Blade's lineup is full of their strongest A rankers, so it's going to be an insanely tough battle. Upon hearing that, Errol gets excited since it means he will get a chance to see a lot of new skills. But Lilia reminds him that the fate of Dragon Fang is hanging in the balance here, so he had better take this seriously. Once the match officially begins, the announcer introduces Black Blade's first combatant, the fencer Gio. But when she begins introducing Dragon Fang's fighter, she pauses for a second, because according to the roster, she's supposed to introduce someone named Errol who is classless, but that can't be right. The crowd begins to murmur amongst themselves because they can't believe a classless loser actually decided to join the tournament, and Gio feels personally insulted by the fact that he has to fight a weakling like Errol. As soon as the match begins, Gio uses Blink Dash to close the distance and stab Errol through the chest, but to his surprise, that turned out to be an afterimage from Errol's shadow skill. He isn't sure how Errol is able to use such a skill when he is classless, but he adapts quickly and begins thinking of a strategy to deal with the afterimages. However, he made a fatal miscalculation because he had thought Errol was limited to only 3 afterimages, and after he had taken out 3 of the clones, he let his guard down, allowing the real Errol to swoop in and deal a finishing blow. Gio falls to the ground unconscious, and the crowd goes wild at the unexpected turn of events. Both Lilia and Lena had faith that Errol would win, but Lena never could have expected that he wins so easily, and everyone in the crowd is just as surprised. But Errol, on the other hand, is far more concerned by the fact that he wasn't able to figure out how Gio's thrust skill works while he was fighting him, so he's going to have to work on it later. Errol's next match is against a dual swordsman, and as the boy charges at him, Errol easily blocks the initial strike and counters with a twin blade slash that knocks him off his feet in one fell swoop, earning him yet another victory. The third competitor he has to go up against is a barbarian, and since Errol has only fought swordsmen up to this point, he tries surprising him with a kick, but he was nowhere near fast enough to catch Errol off guard, so he blink dashes behind the barbarian and slashes him across the neck to end the match. Lena can barely believe that Errol really just eliminated the third A-ranked fighter all by himself, but Lilia is really excited because if they are lucky, Errol might be able to win all 5 matches on his own. Lena tells Lilia that it sounds like she doesn't want to have to fight in the tournament at all, and it sounds like that because it's true. She knows damn well that if she were in Errol's position, she would have been defeated in less than a minute. There's no way she could handle a one-on-one fight with an A ranker, which is why she's focusing all of her energy on cheering for Errol like her life depends on it. In Errol's next match, he's up against a shield bearer and he's having a hard time breaking through this guy's defenses, but he is still outpacing him. The shield bearer is angry because he thinks Errol has been lying about being classless, since there's no way he could have beaten the other three so easily without a class. Errol says his victories have been a result of his tremendous effort, but the shield bearer thinks that sounds stupid because everyone knows effort can never overcome the power of classes. However, Errol points out that if what he said was true, then he wouldn't be getting his ass handed to him by a teenager. The shield bearer charges at Errol and tries to use his shield bash skill to knock him over, but he sees it coming and counters with a kick, knocking the shield right out of the shield bearer's hand. The shield bearer is freaked out because he says he recognizes that kick, and Errol tells him that it's probably because he copied it from the barbarian he fought in the last round, although he still hasn't quite gotten the hang of it. So while he's talking, he adjusts his footing and attempts another kick, striking the shield bearer in the side. The shield bearer doesn't understand how this is possible, since there's no way he should be able to casually learn a skill like that. Errol admits that there are some skills that are really complex, and those take a lot of practice to master, but for some of the more basic ones, he can learn them after simply seeing someone use them. To demonstrate, he walks over to the shield on the ground and picks it up before knocking the shield bearer out with his very own shield bash attack. This is now his fourth victory, and it's clear that Errol is incredibly strong, but the crowd is starting to doubt that he is really classless. They all think he is faking it, so they start yelling for Errol to be disqualified. However, due to all the outrage, the organizers decide to take the liberty of contacting the Guild Association to get a copy of Errol's original class assessment. The announcer asks Errol if he is okay with her sharing his personal information with the crowd, and he says he's fine with it if it will get everyone to calm down. She then proceeds to display Errol's assessment card for all to see, and plain as day, it says Errol is classless, so everyone agrees that he isn't faking it. Lilia says that if she had known Errol was this strong, then she would have pawned off a bunch of her dad's treasures to place an even larger bet. Lena is starting to become concerned about Lilia's gambling problem, but she admits that Errol's strength is greater than anything she could have imagined. The final Black Blade combatant is called up on the stage, and Errol can immediately tell that this guy is a cut above the rest, so he needs to be cautious. Masamune is impressed that Errol could sense the danger and chose to keep his distance, because he planned to lure him into striking range and finish him off in an instant with his ultimate move. As soon as Errol hears the word ultimate move, he decides that it's worth the risk after all, so he starts approaching Masamune's striking range. The second he gets close enough, Masamune unsheathes his sword and performs his lightning speed strike, but just when he thought his sword had connected with Errol's neck, he vanishes. He doesn't understand what just happened, but Errol simply appears behind him and explains that while Masamune is incredibly fast, he was trained by someone who's even faster, so his reaction speed is on a different level. He then uses the ultimate skill he learned from his mom, the Piercing Tempest. After being hit, Masamune is knocked unconscious, so Errol is declared the winner, and both Lena and Lilia look at each other in shock because they can't believe they won without having to do anything. As Errol walks off stage, Lilia jumps at him for a big hug, but he instinctively steps out of the way since his sister used to give him surprise hugs all the time. He then turns and sees Lena with her arms wide open for a hug, but then she realizes what she's doing, so she turns away in embarrassment and apologizes for getting carried away. Errol says he actually would have been fine with hugging Lena, but he wishes she had taken her armor off first so he could enjoy the soft comfort. Meanwhile, from the stands, Jord watches as Errol and the others celebrate their victory, and he vows to make him pay for this humiliating loss. That night, they all return to their guild to celebrate Errol carrying them to victory, and Lilia is still trying to convince him to marry her so she can mooch off his talent for the rest of her life, but he says if he were going to marry anyone, it would be Lena. Lena shoots up from her seat and tells Errol to stop making fun of her because there's no way he actually means it. Errol asks why she would think he is lying, so she explains that most guys often mistake her for a guy who only cares about swinging a sword, and Errol admits that he made the same mistake when he first met her. She is sure that Errol wouldn't want to marry someone with no womanly charm like her, but Errol is staring at two very compelling pieces of charm right now. In any case, Lena says she's focusing on becoming the world's greatest swordswoman so she doesn't have time to spend on romance, and Lilia is relieved to hear that since it means she won't be competing for Errol's attention. She begins rubbing Errol's leg and offers to give him a special massage as thanks for all the hard work he put in today, but Errol turns her down and asks Lena to do it for him instead. However, instead of a regular massage, he says he wants her to start bashing him with her sword like last time. Lena asks if he's really sure about this since she's starting to feel bad about hitting him so much, but he says this is the only way he can learn the gut skill, and Lena is the most skilled and trustworthy person he knows, so she's the only one he can ask to do this. Just then, Lilia's dad comes downstairs to see what all the commotion is, and at first he thinks Lena is taking her frustration out on Errol because they lost this afternoon's tournament, but to his surprise, Lilia tells him they actually won their match against Black Blade and she made enough money to cover their debt and keep the guild operational. Her dad can't believe it and asks if Black Blade made a mistake and sent a bunch of rookies to fight them, but she informs him that they actually sent out their strongest fighters and Errol still managed to beat them all on his own. Lilia's dad is in shock because he didn't think Errol would be so strong, but he refuses to show even a hint of optimism and says it's only a matter of time before he ditches them for a better guild. Lilia says that's not going to happen because she's going to marry Errol, but Errol interjects and says he never agreed to any marriage proposal. Lilia's dad continues talking about how it is pointless to try and save the guild, but Errol is getting sick of all the negativity, so he tells Lilia's dad to shut up because at least Lilia is trying to do something with her life, unlike her sorry excuse for a father. He's always so busy bitching about the fact that he only has one arm now. The last time Errol checked, you only need one hand to hold a sword. That last statement gets Lilia's dad riled up, so he grabs Errol by the collar and tells him he doesn't know what he's talking about since all the dual swordsman skills he once had are practically useless with only one blade. But as someone who had to learn to fight with absolutely zero skills, Errol tells him to just get good already. Lilia's dad has no comeback for that, so he lets Errol go and storms out of the training hall. Lilia apologizes for her father's behavior and she thanks Errol for standing up to him because she thinks his words might have gotten through to Rod a bit. Lena hopes it will encourage him to start training again since she knows he is an amazing person at heart, and Errol says he would love to see Rod training since there are a lot of skills he would want to learn from a dual swordsman. Since Errol seems really interested in learning new skills, Lilia suggests taking a trip down to the dungeon beneath the city. She says it's a place full of traps and swarming with monsters, so Errol is excited to check it out and Lena wants to go too since she needs to get some real battle experience under her belt in preparation for the Sword God tournament. Errol asks her what the Sword God tournament is supposed to be, so she explains that it's similar to the tournament they just fought in. But this one determines the strongest swordsman in the entire city, so it's a really big deal. Lilia assumes Errol will want to participate, so she takes out a form and tells him to sign on the dotted line, but Errol takes one look at it and rips the papers up because Lilia was trying to trick him into signing a marriage certificate. Lilia tries to play it off as a harmless prank, but Errol isn't letting that slide, so he puts her in a headlock and refuses to let her go until she apologizes. Meanwhile, a woman in a dark robe has been spying on them through a crystal ball on Jorg's orders because he is holding a grudge. He soon comes over to ask if she has figured out where they are heading, so she informs him that they are apparently going to the dungeon soon, and Jorg thinks this is perfect, since no one would suspect him if an unfortunate accident were to occur while the kids are in there. The next morning, Lilia sneaks into Errol's room in a nightgown in an attempt to seduce him, but Errol has dealt with this from his sister enough times to sense when someone is invading his personal space, so he wakes up and grabs Lilia by the head as hard as he can. Lilia starts begging for mercy, so Errol lets her go, but he's not taking any chances, so he grabs the bedsheets and ties her to his bed frame. He then heads over to Lena's room to ask her for help talking some sense into Lilia. He knocks on the door and he hears Lena tell him to come in, but when he enters, he finds her fast asleep in bed. It turns out that she's a heavy sleep talker and she's imagining Errol's voice as her father's, and she looks really cute right now, so he plays along and pats her on the head. Later that day, the group heads over to the dungeon, and Errol is surprised that this is what it looks like since he was expecting more of a cave-like entrance. He's also shocked that there are so many people here, but Lena explains that it's because the Sword God tournament is approaching and everyone wants to practice as much as possible before the big day. Once they arrive inside, Lilia shows Errol the teleportation circle and explains that it allows people to instantly teleport to any floor they have been to before. However, since Errol has never been in the dungeon, he's going to have to work his way down from floor 1, but Lilia tells him he doesn't need to worry because she will show him the quickest way to get down to the lower floors. And while she's doing that, Lena can go do whatever she wants somewhere else. Lena says she wants to come as well, but Lilia says there's no need for Errol to have 2 guides, so it would be an inefficient use of her time. She then starts leading Errol over to the entrance, but then she mentions how excited she is to have fun with Errol once they are alone, so he immediately stops and tells Lena that he wants her to come too. Later on, the group faces their first real challenge, living armor. Errol charges in first and clashes swords with one of the armor sets, and he's impressed by how fast it is for armor, but he's still way faster, so he is easily able to cut its head off. However, to Errol's surprise, the armor continues moving even though it has been decapitated. Lena explains that the armor is empty and uses the magic of the dungeon to move so it doesn't have any actual weak spots. In that case, Errol figures that the best way to stop it would be to take out the armor's legs, so he runs off and slashes it in the kneecaps like it owes him money. Lena finishes taking care of her armor soon after, so the room is clear for now, but the armor will start regenerating sooner or later. Lilia then comes over, talking about how tough the fight was, but Errol points out that she literally didn't do anything to help. Lilia defends herself and says it's not her fault since Errol and Lena just took out all the armor sets before she got a chance to do anything. But come to think of it, Errol has literally never seen Lilia fight, so he doesn't even know what her class is. Lilia takes her sword out and tells him she's a fencer, so if he wants to learn any of her skills, she would be happy to teach him. But a fencer is technically just a downgraded version of his mother's sword princess class, so Errol says there's nothing Lilia can teach him. The group starts heading to the room's exit, but all of a sudden they run into a boy who looks severely injured. He tells them that he fell into a trap after entering a new room, and his teammates are still stuck there, so he needs help rescuing them. Lena immediately agrees to help him, but Lilia tells her to hold on for a moment. However, not because she thinks the guy is suspicious, it's because she wants to get paid first. She has a motto of never doing things for free, so she tells the guy to cough up some dough if he wants them to save his friends, and he reluctantly gives in to her demands, so Lilia is now completely on board with helping him. However, while the others are okay with it, Errol thinks this whole thing is sketchy because he seems awfully mobile for someone with so much blood on him. Lilia brushes it off and says not everyone is as strong as Errol, so the guy probably just took a few unlucky hits while he was escaping. Errol still has his suspicions, since if he had lost as much blood as this guy, he wouldn't be able to stand, much less walk, so he is certain the guy's injuries are fake. He's not sure what kind of trap the guy is planning, but he thinks it'll be a good challenge, so he decides to just go along with it. The guy leads them to the entrance of a secret room, and they find a pool of blood in the middle, but no sign of the boy's missing friends. Lena wonders if they are too late, but Lilia is much more concerned about the random coin she spots on the ground, so she rushes to pick it up, inadvertently activating a teleportation circle. The guy begins laughing because his job here is done since he has successfully led the group into the trap, but he failed to realize he was also standing inside the circle, so he gets caught in the trap as well. A moment later, the group finds themselves on a different floor, and neither Lena nor Lilia recognizes this place, so this must be one of the deeper floors. They then hear the guy who tricked them saying it's not fair that he got caught in the trap too, and Lilia is about to give him a beatdown as payback, but she accidentally kicks her coin out into the middle of the room, causing a metal knight to appear. The guy looks terrified and explains that he was paid to trick them into a teleportation trap that would send them to the bottom of a dungeon where they'd have to face a sword god. And that night over there is the sword god in question. Lilia and Lena think the guy is bluffing since sword god classes are only a myth, but a moment later the knight unsheathes its sword and launches a slash that nearly takes the guy's head clean off. The knight then targets Errol and knocks him into a wall with a lot of force, but thanks to all his endurance training with Lena, Errol is able to withstand it with minimal damage. He then strikes back at the knight, but it uses an advanced version of Dash Divine Step to back away. Errol is certain that this is a real sword god, but rather than being worried, he sees this as a good opportunity to go all out and test all his skills. He then uses Divine Step to close the distance and clash swords with the knight, but the knight activates a Divine Presence ability in retaliation. This ability normally restricts the movements of everyone in the area, but Errol is unaffected because he spent a lot of time training with his mom to learn how to counter it. At the time, he could barely stay on his feet, but now he is able to jump out of the way of the knight's attack and dice it to pieces with his infinite break slash. Now that the battle is over, Errol drinks some holy water to recover, and while he is resting, Lena and Lilia ask him how he knew about the sword god skills when even they had never seen it before. He explains that he learned it from his mom, and while she usually limits herself to the moveset of a sword princess, she's actually a sword god. That sounds hard to believe, but Lena knows Errol wouldn't lie about something like that, so she believes him. However, she doesn't understand why his mom would pretend to be a sword princess in the first place. He says his mom just didn't want all the attention that would come with it, so she kept that part a secret. Back on the surface, Rod has just found out about the trap Jorg set, and he is heartbroken by the thought that his daughter might be dead. But to the surprise of both Rod and Jorg, Errol and the others all walk into the bar laughing like nothing happened. Rod is relieved that Lilia is alright, and Jorg can't believe they managed to survive against a sword god. Lilia smirks, telling Jorg that Errol easily defeated it. But that's not all, since they already got the kid to confess that Jorg was the one behind the whole trap. Jorg begins panicking a little over the fact that he was caught, but then he remembers that there are no laws in the dungeon, so he can be arrested for any crimes committed in there. He confidently walks out telling them there's nothing they can do about it, but as soon as he gets home, he starts trashing his room because he can't believe a kid like Aurel is so much better than him. All of a sudden, a sword in his room starts talking to him, and it promises to help him achieve his goal if he sets it free. The next day, Lilia and Lena are sitting in the lounge and Lilia looks really worried because the preliminary pairings for the tournament have been posted, and she just found out she's going to have to go up against Aurel, so there's no way she's making it to the finals now. Aurel tells her not to feel too bad about it, since her chances of winning the tournament at her skill level were already pretty slim. But that doesn't make her feel any better. Fortunately for Lena, she's not in Aurel's section of the preliminaries, but she's still going to have to face a lot of tough opponents, so she needs to do her best if she wants to make it past the preliminaries this year. Lilia also intends to give it her best shot even though she knows there's no way she's beating Aurel, so she says she is heading down into the dungeon again to train today. She asks Aurel to come along since she wants him there for protection in case something bad happens, but he doesn't really feel like dungeon diving again. Just then, Rod comes out to see what's going on, and after learning that Lilia plans to head into the dungeon again, he warns her to be extra careful because there's no telling when Jord might set another trap and he doesn't want to lose her. Lilia can see that her dad is really concerned about her, so she assures him that she will keep her guard up at all times, and hearing that is a huge relief for him. Aurel is surprised by Rod's sudden behavioral change, but after nearly losing his daughter to Jorg's cruelty, he realized that he can't let himself remain a weakling just because he lost an arm, so he has decided to begin training again. Sometime later, the day of the Sword God Cup preliminaries finally arrives and a huge crowd has gathered to see all the swordsmen and women face each other. Lilia ended up losing her first match against a random guy despite all her training, and she is really upset about it. Aurel tries to comfort her by saying her failure was inevitable, so there's no need to beat herself up about it, but again, that doesn't make her feel better in the slightest. Aurel has won all his fights up till now, so the next match for this bracket will be the finals, and while Lilia is aware of how strong he is, she warns him to keep his guard up because the woman he will be facing has a lot of unique skills. Aurel wonders what Lilia means by unique skills since he thought he had seen pretty much all the skills from the dungeon. However, Lilia explains that so far, Aurel has only encountered swordsmanship skills, but that woman has the magic swordsman class, meaning she can enchant her blade with magic as she fights. Aurel is surprised that there are no rules against using magic since this is meant to be a swordmanship tournament, but then again, it doesn't really bother him. He walks out onto the stage, and the first thing the girl says is that being a magic swordsman is allowed by the tournament, so she doesn't want to hear any excuses about magic being against the rules after she wins, and Aurel says he's always ready to face a good challenge. The match begins and the girl begins spamming fireballs, forcing Aurel to jump around the ring to evade them all. He tries charging at her so he can strike the girl up close, but she parries the attack and proceeds to launch another fireball at point-blank range to force Aurel to back off. By this point, Aurel has gotten a solid feel for what the girl is capable of, and he admits that it must be pretty convenient to be able to attack at both long and short ranges like that. But at the end of the day, he says her skill level is only mid-tier because she hasn't truly mastered either magic or her swordsmanship. She's just spamming attacks. The girl gets offended and tells Aurel he won't be saying that once she uses her ultimate technique on him. The girl then uses magic to engulf her sword in fire, and this gets Aurel's attention since it's a rare sight. She begins launching waves of fire at Aurel, and he is truly impressed because the erratic movements of the flames make it difficult to tell where the attacks are coming from. He tells her it is bound to be a spectacular skill when she masters it, but as of now, it's still so basic that he barely needs to move to deflect the flames. If the girl's swordsmanship were at least as good as Lilia's, then he might have actually had trouble dealing with the flame sword skill, but she just came here hoping to beat the competition with sheer firepower, so it won't take much to beat her. The girl grows enraged and says there's no way she could be defeated by a classless loser, but in the next moment, Aurel uses Twin Blade Slash to put out her sword's fire, and he then dashes forward to knock her out. With this, Aurel has been declared the winner of this section of the preliminaries, but the only thing on his mind right now is whether there's some special training he can do to learn how to use magic as well. A few days later, Lilia wakes her dad up from a nap and tells him it's time for Aurel's match in the Sword God Cup, but Rod says he's not going. Lilia starts pulling his arm and begging him to get up because their guild already has registered seats, but he absolutely refuses to attend the tournament. Lilia asks him if it's because he's worried he might run into Jord there, but he says that's not it. He explains that a few days ago he started training again and it made him realize how rusty he had gotten. It might even be a challenge for him to win the Sword God tournament in his current state, but hearing her dad talk about winning the tournament like it's the bare minimum really pissed Lilia off because she couldn't even qualify for it. She tells him he's coming to the arena today whether he likes it or not, and she drags him off the couch so he can get dressed. Once Rod is ready, he and Lilia start heading towards the arena, and as much as he was fussing about not wanting to go to the tournament, Lilia knows he would have gone to watch in secret anyway since he never misses an opportunity to see his guild members perform well, and Rod can't deny that. Meanwhile, over in the arena, Lena is fidgeting in her seat because she's really nervous about her match. Aurel eventually pops up and asks her if something is wrong since he has never seen her so anxious before, but Lilia says she can't help it because this is the biggest tournament in the city, and to make matters worse, she won't find out who her opponent is until the start of her match, so there's no telling what kind of fighter she'll be up against. Just then, the announcer informs everyone that the first match of the day will be between last year's winner, George the Sword Emperor, and Aurel. Aurel is surprised that he's going to be fighting Jorg first, but he's always ready for a good fight, so he heads out to confront Jorg. However, as Jorg steps out into the arena, everyone is shocked to discover that he somehow found a way to make himself even uglier than he was before. And Aurel can sense some sinister energy coming off of him. Rod and Lilia are in the stands, and Lilia wonders why Jorg looks like a monster now, but her dad can tell that something is seriously wrong here. Just then, he notices the sword in Jorg's hand, so he yells for Aurel to stay away from him at all costs because that blade has a powerful demon sealed within it. The demon is surprised because it didn't think anyone would be able to recognize the sword so quickly, and it's clear that it has already taken full control of Jorg's body. The legend says the blade that the sword god used to kill the demon was cursed with a grudge, so the soul of that demon now resides within it, but that sword was supposed to be sealed within the royal vault, so Rod doesn't understand how Jorg could have gotten his hands on it. The demon says it was only a matter of time before some ignorant idiot came looking for power and set it free, and that idiot was Jorg, so now the demon, Durgelda, plans to wreak havoc on the world. Though I have no idea why he chose to patiently wait for the tournament to start before making his appearance if he just wants to destroy the world. Lena can't believe Durgelda is really here, since she learned in history class that this demon was summoned by an evil deity in ancient times to burn the world down, but everyone just thought it was a myth. Everyone begins to panic once they realize this isn't a joke, so they all start running out of the arena, and Durgelda is loving all the shrieks of pure terror. However, before anyone could make it out of the stadium, Durg cast a barrier, trapping them all inside. No matter how hard they try, none of them can escape, and Durg plans to take his time slaughtering them all. But then he notices Aurel squared up for a fight. He finds it amusing that a brat like him is dumb enough to raise his blade instead of begging for mercy, but Aurel says he is confident that he can win this fight. After all, a long time ago, Durg was defeated by a sword god, so he isn't invincible. Durg admits that it's true that he was defeated by a sword god in the past, but based on Jorg's memories, there is no living sword god right now, so there's no one to stop him. Aurel tells Durg that he was wrong about two things just now. First of all, there is still at least one sword god alive in this time period, and two, even though Aurel isn't technically a sword god, he is still confident that he can beat Durg. Durg begins laughing because he thinks Aurel must be delusional, but it stops being funny real quick once Aurel uses Divine Step to close the distance and nearly takes Durg's head off. Durg can't believe his eyes because only a sword god should have that ability, so he demands to know how Aurel acquired it, but he isn't interested in talking right now. He begins relentlessly attacking Durg, but Durg suddenly gets a smirk on his face once he realizes that he is in the body of a sword emperor, so his sword strikes are incredibly powerful. He jumps into the air and lands a direct hit on Aurel's shoulder, slamming him into the ground, but to Durg's shock, once the dust clears, Aurel is perfectly fine. He doesn't understand how a kid could manage to shrug off such a powerful attack, but Aurel just says his training for the guts skill is finally starting to pay off. Durg is starting to get nervous because nothing he tries against Aurel is working, and at this rate, it will only be a matter of time before he is defeated. Soon after, Aurel uses the infinite break skill to attack Durg hundreds of times in a single second, and it is way too much for him to handle, so he is eventually overwhelmed and Aurel stands victorious. Jorg's body is completely out of protection, and he is confident that Durg shouldn't be able to attack anymore, so he starts walking away. Meanwhile, Durg is internally saying every curse word in the book because he doesn't want to be sealed away again, but he knows there's no way he can beat Aurel. He comes to the conclusion that the best course of action here would be to get as far away from Aurel as possible, but to do that, he needs to find a new host whose body will be strong enough to escape. He briefly considers going for Lena, but Aurel is too close to her, so instead he decides to target Rod. All of a sudden, Aurel notices the demon's sword fly out of Jorg's hand in his direction, so he jumps in front of Lena to push her out of the way, but it then pulls up and hits the stands instead. By the time the smoke clears, Lilia is alright, but Durg is now holding the sword to her neck with Rod's body, and he demands that Aurel let him go or else his wife will be killed. Aurel bluntly replies that he never married Lilia, but Durg thinks he is bluffing because he has access to Rod's memories, and he can clearly remember all the times Lilia told Rod that she was going to make Aurel her husband. Aurel suddenly doesn't feel like saving Lilia anymore, so he gets ready to attack anyway, but Lena tells him to stop because Lilia is still their friend. Aurel tells her there's no real reason to worry since he doesn't think Durg would be able to hurt Lilia in the first place, and Durg takes this as a challenge, so he prepares to slice Lilia's throat to prove how heartless he is, but for some reason his arms won't move. Rod is still conscious inside his body, and there's no way he would just stand by and watch as his daughter is murdered with his own hands, so he begins fighting to evict Durg from his body. Durg desperately offers to grant Rod the power to reclaim his former glory if he relinquishes his body, and had this happened a few days ago, Rod might have fallen for the temptation, but thanks to Aurel, he now knows that anything is possible with enough hard work, so he doesn't need Durg's power. Rod regains control of his body and chucks the sword towards Aurel, who then proceeds to slice it to pieces, destroying Durg for good. But if breaking the sword is enough to get rid of him, then why the hell did anyone think it was a good idea to keep it around in the first place? Later on, back at the guild, Rod has regained his passion for swordsmanship. And with all the publicity Aurel brought to their guild, there are a lot of new applicants for him to train. As he is brutally beating them down, he yells that they need to stop relying on their skills so much and learn to defend themselves. But the students all beg him to have mercy because they can't take much more of this. Meanwhile, one of the students is hiding behind a wall nearby when Lilia happens to spot him. She asks why he's slacking off here when he and the others are supposed to be training, but he tells her Rod is way too intense, so he needed a break. Lilia admits that her dad has become a lot more passionate about his swordsmanship since he met Aurel, and speaking of Aurel, the boy asks where he is since he hasn't shown up all day. Lilia informs him that Aurel actually quit the guild recently and Lena's gone too since she went chasing after Aurel. Lilia has been holding herself together so far, but she suddenly breaks out in tears because she doesn't think it's fair that Aurel left her behind. As for Aurel, right now he's on his way back to his hometown, and the driver is surprised to learn that Aurel was able to win the Sword God Cup during his short stay in the city. He asks if he's sure he wants to leave so suddenly at the height of his fame, but Aurel says there's nothing more for him to learn there, so there would be no point in hanging around any longer. Besides, he has been meaning to return home so he can finally test his skills because with everything he has learned, he might actually be able to defeat his mother. Back in Aurel's hometown, his mother is busy picking some flowers in the garden, so he tries sneaking up on her, but she suddenly calls him out without even looking in his direction. She says she's glad to see him again, and she can tell that he has grown a lot stronger since she couldn't sense his presence until he was within a few meters. Aurel bluntly informs her that he won the Sword God Cup, and his mom is excited to hear that because she did the same when she was a kid. However, just as Aurel is about to ask her for a duel to test his strength, she decides to establish her superiority and dashes in front of Aurel so fast that he couldn't react at all. His mom is just messing around, but if she had been holding a sword instead of a flower, he could have been in real trouble, and that's exactly why he wants to train with her again. She says she wouldn't mind sparring with him, but if they did so now, they would definitely end up destroying the house, so she invites Aurel to come to the training grounds behind the mountain, and he happily agrees. Once they arrive, Farah tells him she's excited to see how strong her son has grown and then immediately lunges at him with another divine step attack. However, after seeing her do it once, Aurel has figured out how to react to it. So he raises his sword in time and blocks her strike. He then leaps into the air and performs a combination of divine slash and twin blade slash, but Farah is able to block all the attacks before they hit her. She's impressed that Aurel was able to come up with a way to combine two skills, and Aurel asks her what skill she used to block his attack since he had never seen it before, but she tells him she wasn't using a skill. Watching her, Aurel learned not to rely too much on special skills all the time, as she was just swinging her sword normally to counter. Meanwhile, back in town, the people suddenly hear a lot of loud noises coming from the forest, and they are all frightened because they are worried it might be a powerful monster, but it's just Aurel and Farah going all out. Farah attempts to use Divine Presence to slow Aurel down, but he has already mastered that skill, so it has no effect on him anymore. Farah is impressed by how far Aurel has come, so she says she is going to pull out the big guns now, and Aurel says he's going to do the same, so they both rush forward and hit each other with infinite break. Meanwhile, Lena has just returned home as well, but there's no one around and she wonders if it might have something to do with those loud noises she heard earlier. But that doesn't matter to her because she just wants to see Aurel again. She knocks on his front door to see if he is home, but to her surprise, a little girl opens the door. She assumes this must be Aurel's little sister, so she asks her if Aurel is around, but the girl takes one look at Lena's abundant chest and she gets jealous, so she calls Lena a cow and tries to slam the door. Lena doesn't understand why the girl keeps calling her a cow, but she holds the door open and tries explaining that she just wants to talk to Aurel. However, the girl refuses to listen and tells her Aurel would never want anything to do with a cow like her. Just then, Errol and Farah return, and Farah tells Errol's sister to stop being rude to their guest. The girl is excited to see Errol again and runs into his arms, but she wonders why he and Farah look so beat up. Farah explains that she and Errol had a match and went a little overboard. Errol's sister asks who won, so Farah tells her Errol came out on top, and Lena is amazed to hear that since Farah is a sword god. However, Errol says the only reason he ended up winning was because Farah isn't in top form anymore since she stopped training seriously years ago, so he doesn't want to let this victory get to his head. Farah tells Errol not to say it like that since it makes her sound like an old lady, but he tells her she's still way too pretty to be an old lady. They all head inside and sit down at the table to talk, and Farah would like to ask about all the adventures Errol had in the Sword City, but she's much more interested in hearing about how Errol and Lena met since she loves romance stories. Errol explains that he and Lena lived together while he was in the Sword City, and Farah's face lights up with excitement after hearing that, but Lena clarifies that they were just members of the same guild, so there was no inappropriate behavior between them. Errol asks Lena why she came to visit him all of a sudden, and she says she wanted to ask him why he suddenly abandoned the guild like that. Errol is confused because he's sure he submitted an official resignation letter behind before leaving, so it's not like he left without giving the guild notice, but that's not what Lena is talking about. She tells him he could have at least said goodbye in person before leaving, but Errol didn't put much thought into it. Farah interrupts and says she's glad Errol has a friend who cares about him enough to come all this way just to visit, but Lena tells her this is actually her hometown too, so she would have come back anyway. And checking on Errol wasn't the only reason she wanted to come here, so she turns to Farah and asks if she would be willing to accept her as a disciple. Farah wasn't expecting to hear a request like that, but before she could give Lena an answer, someone suddenly walks in the front door, and she recognizes the voice as that of Evans. Evans enters the room looking for Farah, and he tells her he needs her help with an emergency because there was a terrifying sound coming from behind the mountain a little while ago, and they need to prepare in case it's a monster. Farah and Errol immediately realize that they are the reason for the panic, but Farah knows she would get scolded if she told him the truth, so she lies and tells him she has already defeated the monster. Evans doesn't really question it since he is just relieved that the village is safe, and now that he has calmed down, he notices that Lena is here and asks her when she got back. Farah didn't recognize Lena at first since she looks a lot different from how she was as a kid, but now that she looks closely, Lena does look a lot like Evans' late wife. Evans asks why Lena is at Farah's house, so Farah explains that Lena just asked to learn everything there is to know about being a good wife for Errol. Evans breaks down in tears of joy because he thinks his daughter is going to get married soon, but she freaks out and tells him she just wanted to ask Farah to teach her how to get better at swordsmanship. Farah insists that there will be time for both swordsmanship and wife lessons, but when Lena turns to Evans to ask him to talk some sense into Farah, to her surprise, he seems like he's all for it. After his wife died, he was worried about Lena's future because the only thing he knew how to teach her was swordsmanship, so he would be overjoyed for Farah to teach her some housekeeping skills, and Farah assures him that he can trust her to take care of Lena. Evans is grateful to hear that, so he says he is going to return to his duties now, and he will be leaving Lena in Farah's care, so he tells her to do her best. And Lena is left wondering how things turned out like this. This entire time, Errol's dad has been busy in his study working on his magic research, but he's not surprised when Errol walks in because he overheard the entire commotion earlier. Errol asks how Liam's research has been going, and he is happy to announce that he is really close to a breakthrough. It might even become an ultimate technique if his hypothesis is correct. That aside, he asks Errol if it's true that he brought back a cute girlfriend, and Errol doesn't deny it, but he says he would describe her as more beautiful than cute. More importantly, he says there's something he wanted to talk about. He just defeated Farah in a sword fight, so he would like Leon to teach him magic now. However, Leon says it would be impossible for Errol to learn magic, so he should just give up on it. While that's going on, Farah is in the kitchen with Lena, trying to teach her how to cook, and Lena agrees to give it her best shot, but she has literally no experience with anything other than a sword, so she ends up smashing the table to bits. Lena apologizes for the trouble she caused, but Farah says it's fine since it just means she will have to start from the basics. A little while later, Errol and Leon finish fixing up the table, but while Errol is putting away the tools, he asks why Leon didn't just use magic to fix the table. Leon says Farah likes it when he does things by hand, but since Errol wants to see him use some magic, he picks up Mira's broken mug and casts a rebuild spell on it to put it back together. While he and Errol are putting the materials away, he tells Errol that he really shouldn't get his hopes up when it comes to magic. He has proven that even someone born with no class could learn to use a sword, but using magic requires you to have a large mana pool, and that's not something training can improve. Errol admits that it would be impossible for him to use magic without having a large mana pool, but he asks if it would work as long as he had mana. Leon says he could probably learn spells even without a mage class as long as he has mana, but he doesn't think it's likely that Errol has magic in his body, since if he did, he would have accidentally cast at least some form of magic by now. However, Errol says he is sure he has magic in his body because back in the Sword City, while he was training with Lena, he was burning through a lot of the guild's holy water, so Lilia went into storage and found a bunch of mystery potions for Errol to use instead. Lena told Errol not to drink it since those might be poisonous, but he thought drinking poison might give him a poison-resistant skill, so he did it anyway. In the end, he said it turned out not to be poisonous, and he definitely felt it restored something in his body other than divine protection, so he believes it was mana. If what Errol says is true, then his dad believes he might really be able to learn magic, so he agrees to teach him. He asks Errol if he can still feel the sensation of mana inside his body, and after he confirms it, Leon asks him to try moving it around and condensing it into one point. Errol gives it his best shot, and at first, nothing happens, but eventually, a faint blue light begins to glow in his hand. His father is ecstatic when he sees this because while the light may be small, it is proof that Errol indeed possesses mana, even if it's only a small amount. Errol begins feeling lightheaded because that little light apparently used up all the mana he had in his body, and his dad tells him he is going to have to work to increase the size of his mana pool before he can cast any spells, but working hard is what Errol does best, so he should be able to do it in no time. The next day, Errol heads to the item shop and dumps a pile of gold coins on the counter because he wants to buy all the mana potions they have in stock, and from then on he kept emptying and refilling his mana pool to increase its size. 6 months later, Errol's mana pool has grown enough to allow him to maintain a ball of mana, and his dad congratulates him on a job well done. But there's still a lot of work to do because Errol's current mana is only equivalent to that of a 10-year-old. He hands Errol a piece of paper with magic text written on it, and he explains that normally with a mage class, the magic script for a particular spell would just pop into your head, but since Errol doesn't have any skills, he's going to need to memorize the magic script for every spell he wants to cast. It's going to be difficult, so Leon suggests that Errol could get some help learning the basics in the City of Magic, but he would need to train his mana to get to the baseline needed for entry first. 3 years go by, and Lena has become quite skilled at household skills thanks to Farah's guidance, so she's very grateful. Just then, Lena and Farah hear Mira crying, and a moment later, she walks into the kitchen with a note. She tells them that she went to Errol's room earlier to wake him up, but when she got there, he was gone, and the only thing left was a note. Everyone takes a look at the note, and word for word, it says, "I'm going to the City of Magic, love Errol." They can't believe Errol would leave without at least saying goodbye to them properly, and Mira is especially hurt. Errol did mention that he was interested in the City of Magic, so he was bound to leave eventually, but it still made Mira really upset, so Farah comforts her with a hug. Lena is also sad about Errol leaving so abruptly, but she realizes she has no right to complain since she kind of did the same to her dad when she left for the City of Swords, but she had no idea how bad it felt to be ditched like this. Farah hugs Lena as well and tells her she had better not disappear on them as well, but Lena never had any intentions of leaving when there's still so much for her to learn from Farah. Farah is glad to hear that Lena will be staying even though Errol is gone, but while she's not particularly worried about his safety, she wishes he and his older sister Astia would show a little more concern for the feelings of others. Meanwhile, Errol is already on a carriage heading to the City of Magic, but the driver tells him it's still going to take another 2 days to get there, so he will just have to wait. On another note, the driver tells Errol that he's really intrigued because 3 years ago he became a sensation in the City of Swords, then disappeared and went home immediately, and now he wants to go to the City of Magic too. Errol sits back down in his seat, and the kid sitting next to him asks if he is really heading to the City of Magic since he looks a little old to be applying to the Magic Institute. Just then, the girl sitting across from him yells at Kato to stop being rude because Errol clearly sucks at magic and probably failed the Magic Institute's entrance exams multiple times, which is why he is going back to apply again today. Errol is about to explain that he has never actually taken the Magic Institute's entrance exam, but Kato suddenly yells back at Kufa that she's the one being rude here, and the two begin arguing. The girl sitting next to them, Kali, tries to get them to calm down, and Errol assumes they must all be wizards heading for the Magic Institute, but considering their age, they probably only received their magic blessings a few days ago. After Kato is done arguing with Kufa, he turns to Errol and introduces himself as a red mage. He then asks Errol what kind of magic he is good at, and he thinks about it for a bit. While he was learning from his dad, Leon explained that there are 6 types of magic: red, blue, green, yellow, white, and black, each with their own spells associated with them. Normally, a mage is limited to the spells of their color, but Errol has no such limitations, so Leon taught him the basics of all 6 types of magic. As such, he tells Kato that he isn't particularly good at any kind of magic since he is classless. Kaito and the others think Arel must be messing with them, since no classless person would want to go to the City of Magic, but Arel assures them that he is telling the truth and even pulls out his ID to prove it. The kids are all shocked once they realize that Arel really is classless, and they all start asking why he's bothering to go to the Magic City when everyone knows classless losers can't use magic. Arel has already had this conversation a bunch of times, so he's not really interested in explaining the circumstances to them. But before the kids could say anything more, they heard a terrifying roar coming from the forest. Arel recognizes it as the roar of a Troll King, and the kids are all terrified because they heard that Troll Kings are super strong. Kaito asks the driver to get them out of here quickly, but unfortunately, the roar scared the horses so much that they fainted on the spot, so they won't be going anywhere. Khalid starts freaking out because she's scared of dying, but Kaito and Kufa try to calm her down by saying they have a plan. It's true that a Troll King is powerful, but at the end of the day, it is still a troll, so it should be big and slow. That means their magic attacks are almost guaranteed to hit, so as long as they work together, they should be able to take it down. Just then, a troll walks out of the forest and Kali immediately loses her nerve, but Kaito tells her they need to stay strong if they want to beat the Troll King. However, that wasn't actually the Troll King, and a moment later, the Troll King swats the troll away before revealing its massive frame. All confidence the kids had of beating that thing instantly evaporates because they know none of their magic is strong enough to take something like that down. However, even though his legs are shaking like jelly, Kaito stands on business and takes his wand out because he refuses to die without a fight. He pours all of his magic energy into one attack and launches a fireball at the Troll King. To Kaito's credit, he at least did something, but even though his blast was a head-on hit, it barely scorched the troll's skin, so it just made the troll angrier. To make matters worse, Kaito is completely out of magic, so he can't even spam the attack for cumulative damage. However, just as the troll is about to eat the kids, Arel cast explosion magic on it, reducing it to ash in an instant. Just like what Bakugo would do to Reize, Arel realizes he probably should have used a little less power for that attack since he went a bit overkill, but no one got hurt, so everything worked out in the end. The kids can't believe Arel just used explosion magic because it is a skill that's exclusive to the Archmage class, but he doesn't offer them any explanation and instead heads over to the horses and heals them so they can get back on the road. The driver thanks Arel for his help and says he hopes they don't run into any more trouble like that, but all of a sudden, Kaito kneels before Arel and begins sincerely apologizing for making fun of him earlier because he had no idea that Arel was an Archmage. Arel corrects him and says he's not a master of magic, but that doesn't stop Kaito from asking to become his student. Arel tells him he really isn't a master and pulls out his ID again to show them that he is still classless, but Kua says that the ID must be fake and Arel must be hiding his identity for some reason. Arel desperately tries to correct them, but nothing he says is getting through to their little minds, so he decides to just let it go and climbs back into the carriage so they can continue their journey to the City of Magic. Once they finally arrive, they say goodbye to the driver, and Kaito is constantly hovering around Arel like a loyal student. He asks Arel if he plans to take the entrance exam for the Red Institute, but he's a bit confused because he had no idea that the entrance exams were separate. The kids explain that there is an institute for each type of magic, so Kua will be taking the Blue Magic Institute's entrance exam and Khalid will take the exam for the Green Magic Institute. As for Kaito and Arel, they'll both be taking the Red Institute's entrance exam, but Arel is a little worried that he might not be allowed to take the entrance exam here because he's classless, just like what happened in the City of Swords. He and Kaito later arrive at the Red Institute, and after filling out and submitting his application, the receptionist asks him if he's sure everything he wrote down is accurate. Arel confirms it, so she gives him a number and tells him to wait for his turn on the exam. Arel is surprised and asks her why she's letting him take the exam even though she's aware that he is classless, but the lady tells him that everyone has the right to take the exam, so she has no reason to reject him just because he is classless. Arel can still hardly believe that he's being treated so fairly here, but it's a nice change of pace from the usual discrimination. He and Kaito head to the examination hall together, and as they arrive, they spot a kid in the middle of casting a fireball spell at a knight. The instructor approves of the power output, so he tells the kid he passes and calls for the next applicant to step up. A blonde boy walks out of the crowd, and he jokes that it's funny all the other examinees are using beginner-level magic, and that he could do much better. The others are annoyed by his comments, but the boy is already an advanced class mage, so he has the power to back up his bragging. He asks the instructor if it's alright for him to destroy the dummy with his magic, and he is told it won't be a problem, so he readies his wand and casts an intense pillar of fire around the dummy. Everyone is amazed by the boy's level of power, and even Kaito admits that he is talented, but he says Arel is still better. The boy takes offense to this since he is confident that no one here is as strong as he is, but he isn't childish enough to start a fight over it, so he ignores Kato's taunts. However, Errol doesn't appreciate Kato picking fights for no reason, so he tells him to pipe down. The boy assumes this means Errol is acknowledging that he is superior. After all, it's not every day you meet a mage strong enough to completely melt a set of armor. However, Errol points out that the armor is still in one piece, and the boy is left speechless because he doesn't understand how it could have survived his attack. The instructor sees the confusion on his face, so he explains to him that the armor is actually made of mithril, so it won't be easy to destroy. Kato starts making fun of the boy for bragging so much even though he didn't actually destroy the armor, but Errol smacks him on the head because he has no right to make fun of someone else's strength when he is weaker. It's Errol's turn to take the exam next, and this is his first time testing his magic on mithril, so he decides to go all out for once. He prepares his wand, and after gathering the necessary magic, he casts the eruption spell on the armor. Initially, it doesn't look like much happened since the only thing the kids could see was a thin line of fire that hit the armor, so the boy starts joking that Errol must not be as good as Kato chalked him up to be. However, a second later, the center of the armor begins to glow red and it melts into a puddle of molten mithril in an instant. The boy can't believe what he just saw because the eruption spell shouldn't be strong enough to melt mithril, and Errol tells him he's right, but before he cast the spell, he made a few changes to concentrate the power in a single point, and that raised the heat enough to melt the mithril. The boy is stunned when he hears that Errol tweaked his spell because he didn't even know that was possible, but now that Errol has passed the test here, he decides to head over to the Blue Institute's entrance exam. There he finds Kua, who has just passed her test by hitting the armor with a water ball, and she is shocked to see him here since she thought he was applying at the Red Magic Institute. The instructor then calls for the next examinee, which happens to be Errol, so he steps up and casts a few dozen ice spikes, shattering the mithril armor in one go. He then turns and starts walking away because his next stop is the Green Institute. However, as he is walking up to the building, he notices Colette on the floor outside, so he goes over to ask her if something is wrong. She is surprised to see him here, but when he asks why she's crouched outside like this, she tells him that she's so nervous that she can't even bring herself to head inside and register for the exam. She's the kind of person who doesn't perform well when she's under pressure, and usually Kato and Kuo would help calm her nerves, but they aren't allowed to join her in the exam hall. She asks Errol what he usually does when he gets nervous, but in all honesty, Errol has never felt nervous before in his life. He asks Colette to explain what being nervous feels like, so she tells him that it's sort of like being afraid of failure, but Errol doesn't understand either since he has only been able to get this strong because he lets himself fail over and over during his training. The way he sees it, most failures in life won't result in your death, and this entrance exam isn't life-threatening as far as he knows, so there really shouldn't be a reason for Colette to be so scared. Colette is awestruck because she didn't think Errol would be so insightful, but that was really good advice. She thanks Errol for his help and tells him she's going to take the test after all, so they both head inside and register. Errol is called up first, and he is told to cast a wind spell to move the windmill, so he casts Tornado, but he unintentionally destroys it since he didn't realize it was made from regular wood. Everyone is amazed by his performance, and afterwards, the instructor calls on Colette to go up next, but she's getting nervous again because she can't do anything close to what Errol just pulled off. She starts thinking of backing out, but then she remembers Errol's words and decides to give it her best shot anyway. In the meantime, Errol leaves and heads over to the Yellow and White Institutes to take the exams, and once he's done with those, he heads over to the Black Institute, but this place seems really run down. As he is walking through the hall, he spots a cardboard box with a pair of eyes sticking out of it, and a second later, a woman comes over in a panic, asking him if he has seen her goo, so Errol points to the box on the floor, but he's starting to get freaked out. The woman runs over to the box and she is relieved to find Gooey in there, introducing it as the clay mirror she created recently with a bunch of random animals, and Errol really doesn't know what to say to that. Just then, a skeleton taps him on the shoulder and welcomes him to the Black Institute, but that triggers Errol's instincts, so he reflexively chops her head off. The skeleton's head rolls to the ground and her body chases after it while telling Errol that it's really rude to chop a lady's head off like that. Errol still has no idea what's going on here, but he can tell she isn't hostile, so he doesn't attack anymore. The skeleton's name is Latalia, and she tells Errol that she is the one in charge of the Black Institute, but since they rarely get applicants here, there isn't an exam, so Errol is accepted automatically. This definitely turned out weirder than he thought it would, but on the bright side, he has accomplished his goal of gaining admission to all 6 institutes.
Errol later meets up with the kids and informs them that he is done with all his exams, but they are shocked when they find out he has IDs from all 6 magic schools. Kaito had no idea it was even possible to be accepted into more than one institute, but apparently, the 6 magic schools don't share student information with one another, so none of them know that Errol is multitasking. Besides, he made sure to fill out all the paperwork for admissions properly, and there were no rules stating that he can't attend more than one, so he doesn't think he should have any problems. However, when he takes a look at his class schedule, he realizes that he does have a problem since the schedules for the different classes all overlap, and there's no way he can be in 2 places at once. The kids all tell him this is why it's not possible to attend multiple institutes at once. But then Arel takes a closer look at the fine print, and he discovers that attendance only counts for 20% of his grade, so as long as he does well in the exams, he can just skip classes altogether without having to worry about his grade. It sounds like a good plan in theory, but the kids tell him he can't do that since none of the textbooks in the library are up to date, so if he wants to pass the exams, he's going to need to take note of what the instructors say in class. That puts a wrench in Errol's plans. But since he just needs to get notes of what the instructors say in class, he asks the others if they'd be willing to take notes and share them with him after class. They all say they'd be happy to help, and Errol is glad to hear it since he doesn't have to worry about the fire, wind, and water classes anymore. But he still needs to figure out what to do about the rest. He won't need to worry about the Black Institute since, according to Latalia, they don't actually have any classes over there. But the White and Yellow Institutes are a different story. However, if it's just those two, he could probably cycle between them to gather as much information as possible before the exams. But since today is his first day, Kaido asks Arel to come with him to the Red Institute, and they all head off to class. Once they arrive at the Red Institute lecture hall, Arel and Kaido start walking to the back of the class so they can have a seat, but along the way, they are spotted by the mage kid from the entrance exam. The kid's name is Royce, and he immediately recognized Errol. So he calls him out and says, there's what Arel pulled off during the entrance exam had to be a fluke, because there's no way an inferior spellcaster could outdo an advanced class mage like him. Errol stares at Royce with confusion and tells him that he isn't a spellcaster. Royce is shocked to hear that, but he assumes that must mean Errol is an advanced class mage as well, which would explain how he was able to use such high-level magic. However, Errol tells him he isn't a mage either. And this leaves Royce in disbelief because if Errol isn't a spellcaster or an advanced mage, then that must mean he is a supreme class archmage, but Errol tells him he isn't an archmage either. At this point, Royce thinks Errol is just messing with him. So when the teacher finally shows up to begin the class, Royce asks him if he can confirm what Errol's class is. The teacher takes a look at his class roster, and after locating Errol's information, he informs Royce that Errol is classless, and Errol confirms it too. Royce is speechless because he can't believe the person who outdid him during the exam would turn out to be classless, but Kaido tells him he will eventually get used to all the abnormal things Arel manages to pull off. It's time for class to begin. So the teacher tells everyone to take their seats and open up their textbooks because today, they will be studying the intricacies of Magiscript. Kaido is having a hard time keeping up with all the complicated Magiscripts the teacher is writing down, but Arel, on the other hand, has already learned all about Magiscript from his dad, so this is easy for him. However, he wonders why the teacher is even bothering to have a class on this because he thought everyone with a magic class automatically had the necessary Magiscript information downloaded into their brain, almost as if he could tell what Errol was thinking. The teacher addressed the class and told them that while it's true that many of them are already able to cast spells automatically with their skills, it is still important to understand the fundamentals of the Magiscript behind the spell because it allows you to improve your spell's efficiency. And if you're advanced enough, you might even be able to tweak the parameters of a spell to achieve a different effect. As soon as Errol hears this, he realizes it sounds exactly like what he did back during the entrance exam, but he had no idea it was such an advanced skill since his father used to do it all the time like it was no big deal. After that first class, Errol spent half the day trying out the classes at the other institutes, but none of them really had much to offer him. However, the Green Institute's lesson for the day is about flight magic, and Errol is really interested because he has never tried it before. Khalid is surprised that Arel doesn't know how to fly yet, even though he's capable of using such advanced magic, but that's a long story. He tried asking his dad to teach him to fly a couple of times, but Loan is absolutely terrified of heights, so he completely refused to use any magic that involved flying. Once it's time for the lesson to begin, the instructor tells everyone to spread out and imagine themselves riding an upward air current to take off. Using that advice, it should be pretty easy to take flight assuming you already have a flight skill to handle most of the spellcasting, but in Errol's case, he has to do everything manually, so the instructor's advice is pretty much useless to him. He looks over at Khalate, and she doesn't seem to be having any trouble following the instructions and taking off. But it takes a lot of practice to balance yourself once you're in the air, so she ends up falling down soon after, but she's sure she'll get the hang of it eventually. However, Ariel still needs to figure out how to get himself in the air in the first place. Since everyone else seems to be imagining an updraft to lift themselves into the air, Errol wonders if he can create the same effect by casting a tornado at his feet. He decides to give it a try, but in the next moment he is launched hundreds of meters into the sky, and he comes crashing down hard into the ground. Khalid rushes over to make sure Errol is alright, and he tells her he's fine, but he says he really needs to adjust the tornado output next time. Just then, one of the other students comes over to show off how good he is at flying, and both Aril and Khalid are amazed by his level of skill. So he starts bragging that he has been training his flight skill ever since he became a spellcaster, and he hasn't lost a single race yet. Errol asks what the kid means by a race, so Khalid explains that it's a sports event where participants have to fly through a course to win. Errol thinks it sounds like fun, so he says he will participate in the next race, but the kid tells him he can't join in unless he knows how to fly. Errol says he will just keep practicing until he figures it out, but the kid tells him he won't have enough time for that. The next race is in 2 months, and while floating may be easy, learning to actually fly takes at least 6 months of training, so he stands no chance. The kid isn't necessarily trying to be mean, but he just thinks there's no way Aril could master flight in less than 2 months, so he tells him to focus on facing him in next year's race instead. The kid then flies off, and Colette asks Arel if he is going to wait for next year's race after all, but he thinks 2 months is more than enough time for him to learn to fly. A few weeks later, Khalid, Kufa, and Kaido are all back in school after dark, and Kaido is wondering why the others asked him to come here. Colette explains that she forgot something here, so she needed to come and get it, but she was too scared to go alone. Kaito understands that, but he doesn't see why she needed to bring him along when she already had Kufa with her. Colette says it was actually Kufa's idea to ask him to come along, and Kufa nervously says she just thought it would be a good idea to have Kaido here for extra protection, especially with all the rumors lately. Kaido asks what rumor she's talking about, so Kufa explains that people have been seeing a ghost around the school every night for the past few weeks, and as soon as Kaido hears that, he starts freaking out because he is terrified of ghosts. Kufa thinks his reaction is hilarious, so she starts making fun of him for being scared, but Kaido points out that Kufa has been hiding behind Khalid this entire time, so she's just as scared as he is. The two of them start arguing, and Colette tries to calm them down, but all of a sudden, they point to the window behind her in horror because there's something headed this way. Before Khalid has a chance to react, the figure opens the window and covers her mouth. So Kaido takes out his wand and threatens to burn it to ash if it doesn't let Khalid go this instant. But then he hears a familiar voice telling him to quiet down before someone notices them, and as he takes off his hood, they all realize that the figure is actually Aril. They ask him what he's doing here so late at night. So Aril explains that he has been coming here every night for the last few weeks to practice his flight in preparation for the upcoming race. They are all really impressed by Aril's determination, but Kaido asks him if he's sure he should be working so hard since training every night has got to be exhausting. Aril appreciates the concern, but he tells Kaido and the others that he always makes sure to get an adequate amount of sleep each day. In fact, before they showed up, he was having a nap outside. The others can hardly believe what they are hearing, so they ask him if that means he was somehow using flight magic while sleeping at the same time, and Aril tells them that's exactly what he was doing. It helps him stabilize the spell to the point that it's second nature to him, and it also increases his mana pool, so it's really effective for training. Kaido is amazed by how seriously Aril takes his training, and he knows he doesn't expect to be able to reach Aril's level, but he plans to start training hard on his own too, and the others plan to do the same as well. The next day, Aril is in class with Kaido again, and while the teacher is writing a spell on the board, he notices that there's a mistake, so he points it out. The teacher realizes that Aril is right, so he starts correcting the mistakes, and Kaido thinks it's really impressive that Aril was able to notice the mistake so quickly. Aril says he has all the spells in the textbook memorized since they don't just appear in his head like with the others, but Kaido can barely memorize one spell, so he asks how Aril managed to memorize all of them. Aril says he just simplified a bunch of the spells to make them easier to remember and activate, and the teacher finds the idea fascinating, so he calls on Aril and asks him to write one of his spells on the board. Aril does so without hesitation, and after inspecting Aril's work, the teacher confirms that the simplified spell will work. But he notices that Aril took out all the spell's safeguards, so there's a risk of exploding if a mistake is made. Aril is aware of the risk, but he can tank an explosion or two, so he didn't see a need to waste time on safeguards. As reckless as Aril sounds, the instructor can tell that he already has a perfect understanding of spell magiscript, so he asks him if he'd like to take the promotion exam to move up to the 2nd grade. Aril likes the idea, so he agrees to take the exam, But then Royce raises his hand and says he wants to participate as well, and the teacher sees no reason to stop him, so they all head to the test site together. The rules of this exam are simple. Along this track, a monster is going to be released, and Errol and Royce are going to need to defeat it before it gets too close to them if they want to pass. It sounds easy enough. So Royce says he will go first and jumps down into the track. A minotaur is then released into the track, and it starts charging straight for Royce, so he casts an eruption spell at the minotaur, but he completely airballs it. Errol is impressed because he can tell that the power of Royce's spell has increased significantly since the entrance exam, and the teacher agrees, stating that it's the result of all of Royce's hard work. But it doesn't matter how powerful your spell is if you can't hit your target. Royce desperately fires off more eruption spells as the minotaur closes in on him, but his aim is absolutely garbage, so it eventually gets too close and is about to attack, but at the last second, it disappears. The teacher says Royce was never in any real danger since they have a safety system set up to keep the monsters from hurting any students. But he hopes the test taught him a valuable lesson about his capabilities as a mage. As much as Royce hates to admit it, he can't deny that he is still too weak to pass the test. But the teacher tells him he shouldn't feel too bad about it since it usually takes students 2 years before they are strong enough to pass. Next up is Errol, so he gets into the track. And the teacher releases the monster, but for some reason, this one seems a lot bigger and stronger than the minotaur Royce had to face. Just then, one of the other instructors comes out to warn Braza that a mistake was made, and a superior minotaur was accidentally mixed in with the regular minotaurs that are used for the exam. Braca realizes this could be dangerous since a superior minotaur might be able to break through their safety system, so he warns Errol to get out of there, but he says it's fine since he's sure he can beat it. He creates 2 fire javelins and throws them at the monster, but it is too agile to fall for a frontal attack, so it easily jumps over them. However, Errol already planned for that, so he makes the javelins turn around midair and strike the minotaur in the back, buying him enough time to incinerate it with his modified eruption spell. With that, Errol has passed the promotion exam, and later that day, Kaido is telling the others all about how awesome Errol was, but Kufa notices that he seems upset for some reason, so she asks him what's wrong. Errol says he was only allowed to take the promotion exam early because the teacher recommended him for it. But that promotion only applies within the Red Institute, so now he needs to figure out a way to convince the teachers at the other schools to do the same.
At the same time, Lena is still back at Errol's house learning from Farah, and she is dealing with the most anxiety-inducing part of cooking. Trying not to flinch after dropping food into a pan of hot oil. Back in the City of Magic, Errol heads to the Blue Institute so he can ask the instructor to let him take the promotion exam. She brushes Errol off and tells him the exam is only held once a year, but he points out that the rules say he's allowed to take it early as long as he gets a professor to recommend him for it. The instructor can't deny that, so she tells him she will consider recommending him for the exam, but only if he starts taking attendance seriously. However, that's not good enough for Errol because the whole reason he wants to take the exam early is so he can avoid having to take a bunch of useless classes. The instructor is deeply offended that Errol thinks her classes are useless, but he says he didn't mean it that way. He just meant that he is too advanced to be stuck learning the basics, so he wanted to move up to the next level. The instructor takes this as a personal challenge, so she tells Errol he had better be ready to prove that he is really too advanced for her class, and that sounds like good news to him. Instructor Hengel takes Errol out to the test area while Kufa watches from the stands, and she is a little worried that Errol might be overstepping by challenging Hengel since she is really close to becoming an archmage. The test Errol agreed to is a mock battle between him and Hengel, and the rules are simple. Physical attacks are banned, and if Errol is able to deplete all of Hengel's divine protection with his magic, then he wins. Errol says he understands, and just to make sure, he asks if she will allow him to take the promotion exam once he's done with her little test. Hengel confirms this, but she can't believe Errol really thinks he has what it takes to defeat an institute instructor in a magic duel. She plans to show him the real difference between the abilities of a teacher and a student like him. So as soon as the match begins, she casts a massive ice storm right next to Errol, freezing him in a block of ice. Hengel then looks up at Kufa and tells her to take note of this, because in a duel, the best way to win is to unleash a powerful spell right at the start to immobilize your opponent before they can react. However, to Hengel's surprise, moments later, Errol punches through her ice, and it is revealed that he actually blocked her ice storm by putting up 4 ice shields, so he was never frozen to begin with. Hengel is impressed that Errol was able to react in time to counter her spell. That alone isn't enough to make her acknowledge his skill. It's now Errol's turn to make a move, so he casts a dozen ice spikes, and Hengel thinks it's amusing that he is using such a basic spell to attack her. But Errol ups his game and spawns in another 50 ice spikes, leading Hengel to realize he may be more talented than she gave him credit for. However, that doesn't mean she thinks Aurel is better than her, and to prove it, she casts her own ice spikes to cancel out the ones Aurel made. She says she could easily create double this amount, and Aurel decides to take her up on the challenge, so he proceeds to double the amount of ice spikes he has created. Hengel does the same, but then Aurel creates an extra 100 spikes to her left, right, and rear, and Hengel immediately realizes that she can't match this many by herself, so she switches tactics and casts an ice wall to protect herself. Aurel's ice spikes all hit with an incredible amount of force, and she is amazed that he is able to sustain an attack like this, even though controlling this many spikes at once consumes an incredibly large amount of mana, but she is confident that her shields can hold out. In fact, it looks like all of Aurel's ice spikes are actually making her ice wall thicker, so she doesn't even need to worry about maintaining the wall with her mana anymore. Eventually, Aurel stops his onslaught of ice spikes and says it's time for his final attack. Hengel thinks he must be delusional because there's no way he could break through such a thick ice wall. But Aurel tells her he intentionally used his ice to thicken her walls, and she may not have noticed, but there's nothing protecting her from aerial attacks right now. Aurel immediately conjures an icicle lance from above, and Hengel is dumbfounded because she didn't think he would still have the mana to cast another spell so soon. She frantically looks for a way to dodge the attack, but she is completely boxed in, so her only choice right now is to try to block the top with an ice shield. But the power of Aurel's spell is too much for her to handle, and she is eventually overwhelmed. Later that day, Aurel meets up with the others, so Kufa tells them all about his battle with Hengel, and since he proved his strength against her, Hengel told him he could just skip the exam and go straight to the 2nd grade. That takes care of his Blue Institute promotion, so next he decides to head to the Green Institute to make the same request, but the instructor there tells him there's nothing she can do. Aurel asks why, since the other institutes allowed an early promotion exam as long as an instructor recommended him, but she tells Aurel that not all institutes share the same rules, and over here they are very strict about procedure when it comes to promotion exams. But that said, she did find a record of the headmaster personally giving permission to skip a grade to exceptional students, and Aurel thinks this might be his chance, but the instructor tells him he had better not be thinking of going to bother the headmaster right now because he's very busy and doesn't have time to meet with individual students. And if Aurel were to interrupt him while he's in the middle of important school business, that could be grounds for expulsion. Aurel really doesn't want to risk that. As far as he can tell, getting in contact with the headmaster is the only way he can get a promotion. He asks the instructor if it would make a difference if he demonstrated his wind magic skills right now, but she tells him that's also against the rules, so he's out of luck. Just then, Colette speaks up and says she has an idea because the flight race is coming up soon, and it's a tradition for the winner of the race to receive commendations from the headmaster of the school. That means if Aurel is able to win the race, he will have proved himself to the headmaster, and that might be enough to get him the promotion he wants. The instructor admits that Khalid's plan might work, but the flight race has over 300 participants each year, so there's no guarantee that Aurel will come out on top. However, he is certain that he will be able to win because he has put a lot of work into his flight magic. On the day of the race, Aurel steps out onto the course with the others cheering for him from the sidelines, but a moment later, that kid who challenged Aurel to a race a few months back shows up. His name is Skeek, and he says he's going to win the race easily, but Aurel says he plans to win the race instead, and Skeek is offended that someone who could barely get off the ground weeks ago thinks he can beat him in the race. He tells Aurel he has been practicing flight a lot longer than anyone else here, so there's no chance that Aurel will win. Just then, the announcer, Grid, gets everyone's attention and tells them the flight race is about to begin. The course starts here at the Green Institute, heads out the front gate of the Magic City, then circles around the perimeter of the city before returning here. And the headmaster is in attendance today, so everyone had better give it their all if they want to impress him. Though the headmaster adds that they should still keep their safety in mind since he doesn't want anyone getting hurt. They also have instructor Dumble here for live commentary on the events of the race, and all the girls really seem to like him. Kaito reminds them that Dumble is a married man, and he's also 20 years older than them, but they don't seem to care. As the race begins, all the participants take off into the sky at once, and everyone seems to be doing their best to take the lead. But then there's Marco, who somehow manages to crash into the audience stand. As for the rest of the racers, the front of the pack has thinned out to around 15 participants. Among them is the front-runner, Daeon from grade 3, and most of the people behind her are either in grade 2 or 3. But Grid and Dumble notice that there are 2 new faces here from the 1st grade, Aurel and Skeek. Skeek is shocked that Aurel is actually able to keep up with him, but he says it shouldn't be surprising since everyone is moving relatively slowly to conserve energy for the rest of the race. A little while later, Grid announces that the first major hurdle of the race is coming up, where the students will have to squeeze through the front gate and then make a sharp turn to the left. It may seem simple, but 2 of the participants have already failed the turn because they failed the maneuver. Skeek is coming up on the turn as well, and doesn't want to make the same mistake as the others, so he makes sure to line himself up with the center of the gate, and once he makes it through, he drifts himself mid-air to make the turn while the other two go crashing into the water as well. Skeek is really proud of himself because he's sure Aurel wouldn't be able to pull off a move like that with only a few months of training, but to his surprise, Aurel is still right behind him. The pack of frontrunners has thinned out even more, and Daeon decides to make her lead even more pronounced, so she starts speeding up, leaving everyone else in the dust. But Grid and Dumble are surprised to see that a pair of first graders are actually managing to keep up with her. Daeon is just as surprised since this is the first time this has happened, and Skeet proudly announces that she better get used to second place because he's going to be the winner of this race. Daeon is happy to accept the challenge, but since Skeek is so sure he's going to win, then he won't mind if she kicks things up a notch. Daeon then proceeds to speed up, and Skeek is in disbelief because he had no idea she wasn't going at max speed already. He tries to keep pace with her, but before long she is already out of sight, and Skeek doesn't have the energy to speed up anymore. So as much as he hates to admit it, there's no way he can win the race now. Grid and Dumble notice that Skeek isn't speeding up anymore, meaning he must have hit his limit, but considering the fact that he's still only a first grader, he is sure to become even better in the years to come. But that aside, it looks like Daeon still has some competition because Aurel is caught up and he is close to passing her. Daeon refuses to let him take her first place spot, so she starts going at max speed to shake him off. Aurel only started learning flight magic 2 months ago, so as things stand, this is the fastest he can go, but he needs to do something to keep up with Daeon, so he decides to use his secret weapon. He compresses air beneath his feet and then proceeds to give himself a massive boost in speed, leaving everyone shocked because they've never seen him move like this before. Even Grid is speechless, but Dumble pays close attention and realizes Aurel is basically jumping on the air. Grid asks him how something like that is even possible because it doesn't make sense to him. Wind magic can allow you to compress the air beneath your feet to make a solid platform, but the boost from that alone would be negligible, so for Aurel to be getting such a large boost, his legs must be insanely strong. Aurel continues to keep pace with Daeon's max speed, but they are quickly approaching the city gate again, and in order to make the sharp turn, they are going to need to slow down if they don't want to crash. Daeon tries to outlast Aurel, but she is eventually forced to slow down because she knows she won't be able to make the turn at this speed. However, Aurel on the other hand keeps going, and right as he gets to the turn, he punches the air to redirect himself. From there, he maintains his first place lead all the way to the finish line, and with this, he is officially crowned the winner of the flight race. After landing, Daeon comes over to congratulate Aurel on his victory since she can tell he put a lot of work into preparing for this, and a few moments later, Skeet crosses the finish line, earning himself third place, but he is unbelievably exhausted right now. Later on, Aurel is approached by the headmaster who presents him with his flight certificate and medal for coming in first place, but before he leaves, Aurel says he has a favor to ask. He says he wants to be promoted to the second grade, and since he has already proven his excellent wind magic capabilities in the race, the headmaster grants him the promotion. Now, Aurel is officially in the second grade of the Red, Blue, and Red Institutes, but he still needs to find a way to get promoted in the other 3 schools. Next, Aurel heads to the Yellow Magic Institute to try the promotion exam, but to his disappointment, he finds out that the registration period for the assembly has passed, and without officially registering, he can't get the promotion. He can't believe he missed the deadline, and when he asks when the next assembly will be taking place, he is told that he will have to wait a few months, but that's way too long for him. He asks the woman if there's any way she can make an exception and let him join the current assembly since he went through all the trouble of creating a new golem for it, but there are strict rules about this kind of thing. However, just then, a man happens to be passing by, and when he hears Aurel mention that he created a new type of golem, he becomes interested and offers to register Aurel as his assistant, which will allow him to participate in the current assembly, and Aurel eagerly accepts since it's the perfect solution to his problem. However, when he turns back to the receptionist, she tells Aurel she can't believe he agreed to be Rogwell's assistant. He asks if there's something wrong with Rogwell, and it's not like he's a bad person, but he is the best instructor when it comes to golem controlling, and he often goes all out against his students, crushing them completely. And he's kind of a jerk about it too, which is why no one wanted to be his assistant for this assembly. But even though that does sound like it could be a hassle to deal with, as long as being Rogwell's assistant allows him to participate in the current assembly, Aurel is fine with it. The day of the assembly arrives soon after, and after many brilliant presentations, it is finally Rogwell and Aurel's turn to make a presentation, and Rogwell announces that he will be demonstrating the might of his golems today. All the students in the crowd know that means he plans to crush another student in a mock battle, and they feel bad for the poor sucker who got roped into being his assistant. Rogwell summons his battle golems and tells Aurel to do the same, so he obliges and calls for Alpha to come out. Just then, the battle golem Aurel created walks out into the arena, and everyone is surprised since they have never seen a golem made out of metal before. Rogwell is especially skeptical since metal is too heavy to be controlled by earth magic, so he assumes Aurel must have hidden someone in there. When he takes the golem's head off, he discovers that the body really is empty, and the metal just happens to be really light. Aurel mentions that he alchemized the metal himself, and Rogwell takes that to mean he sacrificed sturdiness to make it light enough to control, and if that's the case, then it will never hold out against his earth golems. He orders the first golem to charge at Alpha, and he was expecting Alpha to fall apart after a single punch, but to his surprise, not only did Alpha block the punch, but in the aftermath, the arm of Rogwell's golem completely crumbles to dust, leaving everyone in utter shock. Rogwell can't believe Alpha was really able to withstand a hit from his golem, but losing an arm is no big deal because with his expensive mana pool, he can regenerate and reinforce his golems as much as he wants, so he orders all of them to jump Errol's golem at the same time. Errol realizes it will be difficult to counter 4 golems at once, so he decides to use the special feature he built into Alpha and pulls 2 swords out of her back. Rogwell can see what Aurel is trying to do, but he thinks it's a dumb move since golems are nowhere near flexible enough to use swords effectively in combat. However, in the next moment, Alpha dashes past all his golems, slicing them to pieces in an instant. With this, Aurel is officially the winner of this mock battle, but Rogwell doesn't understand how this could possibly happen. Errol helps him back to his feet and explains that he intentionally designed the golem with lightweight alchemized metal and flexible joints to make it possible for it to perform complex movement without difficulty, and combining that with Errol's existing knowledge of swordsmanship, it was easy to have it perform sword techniques. Rogwell admits that Errol's golem is without a doubt better than his own, and Errol asks if that means he is allowed to take the promotion exam now, but Rogwell tells him that instructors' assistants aren't actually considered for the early promotion. However, if Aurel is willing to join his research team in the meantime, then Rogwell promises to put in a good word for him with the headmaster. Aurel is fine with that as long as it gets him promoted to the next grade, and since he's done here, he then heads to the White School and asks to take the promotion exam. The promotion process here is a lot more straightforward, so an exam is arranged for Errol, and he is introduced to Kaede, who will be in charge of his test. Errol notices that Kaede seems to be blind, so he asks her if she needs any help getting around, but as much as she appreciates the concern, she tells him she is perfectly fine. She may not be able to see, but she can sense the magic in the world around her, and she can even tell the personality of someone from their magic as well. However, when she looks at Aurel, not only does he seem to have a bottomless reserve of mana, but he also has several different types of magic swirling in his body at once, and this is the first time she has seen anything like it. She leads him to the test site, an underground dungeon which is infested by undead monsters, and Kaede warns him to be careful since the undead will attack him on sight. But to her surprise, when Errol runs into a group of undead, he just begins spamming holy light to get rid of them. He then continues walking further into the dungeon, but Kaede tells him to wait because the test was actually just to defeat the undead close to the entrance, so he has already passed. Besides, she says if he keeps spamming spells like that, he's going to run out of magic sooner or later, but Aurel tells her he has only used around 1% of his total magic. Either way, Kaede says they should start heading back to the entrance, but along the way, Errol notices something hiding in the corner over there, so he fires a ray of holy light at it. And it turns out that there was an undead hiding there. Kaede realizes this must be a high-level one if it was able to hide its presence, but Aurel doesn't really care, so he cuts the undead off mid-speech and hits it with a holy cross spell to get rid of it. He then asks Kaede to hurry up so they can get started on the paperwork for his promotion, but Kaede still has a lot to process here because she can't believe what Aurel just did. From what she could sense, that creature back there was an undead wight, and it was an advanced monster. Errol admits that it did seem a little different since it was able to talk, but he didn't think about it much. Kaede then asks where Errol learned to use the Holy Cross spell since it's a high-level spell that only expert exorcists gifted with incredible talent are able to use, but Errol always just thought of it as a slightly more powerful Holy Ray, so he doesn't see what's so special about it. The last one left is the Black Magic Institute, but as it turns out, there isn't a promotion exam here. Errol decides to spend his time doing some reading instead. Latalia eventually shows up and he asks her why there's no promotion exam here. So she explains that there used to be one before, but that system kind of fell apart since there aren't many students attending the Black Institute in the first place. Errol admits that there are barely any students in here as he looks around the room. But then he notices the big room over there, and he has been curious about it for a while now, so he asks Latalia what it's for. She explains that the room is for students to test out their magic, since while the other institutes are able to freely test their magic outdoors, dark magic tends to be a little more dangerous. So she had a reinforced magic room built so her students can try out the spells they learned. If that's the case, then Errol decides to head in there to try out a few of the more complicated spells he read in these books, but once he is inside the room as he is flipping through the books, he realizes that there's one here that he has never seen before. He opens the book and all of a sudden, a burst of mana escapes from it, and Errol can tell that the mana was pretty ominous. But this room is magically reinforced, so it shouldn't have been able to get outside. He looks around to see where it went, and that's when he spots someone floating up in the air. That thing doesn't seem like a human, so Errol asks if it's a demon, and the demon confirms it. It says it has been locked away in that book for years now, and none of the black mages here have been clueless enough to open it without checking what was first. He says he owes Errol a lot of thanks for his help, but if he's going to get back to the demon world, then he's going to need a lot of human flesh and blood as a catalyst, so he intends to kill Errol here and now. However, Errol doesn't intend to go down so easily, so he shrugs off the demon's attack and prepares to cast an explosion spell at it. But to his surprise, it doesn't work. The demon laughs and tells Errol that he already set up an anti-magic barrier in here, so no spells can be used in here. But that's not going to stop Errol. He charges at the demon, and it assumes he must be out of his mind because there's no way a mage would be capable of fighting hand-to-hand. But before he could even finish his sentence, Errol had already sliced its head off with his wand. The demon can't believe what just happened, but it reattaches its head and comes to the conclusion that Errol must be a magic swordsman. However, even if that's the case, it still thinks there's no way Errol can beat it because it has the blessing of immortality, so no matter how much Errol hits him, he won't die. That certainly makes dealing with the demon troublesome, but Errol recalls that demons use mana to maintain their physical forms, and even with immortality, taking damage over and over is bound to drain the demon's mana reserves, so he decides to just spam attack him until he gives up. At first, the demon tells Errol his attacks are pointless, but eventually he notices that his body is shrinking, and his tone suddenly changes as he now realizes he isn't as invincible as he thought he was. After a few hours of being beaten by Errol, the demon has now been reduced to action figure size, and he is begging Errol to have mercy on him, because if he shrinks any smaller than this, he might actually disappear altogether. Errol decides that he has tormented the demon enough for one day, so he agrees to let it go, but not before putting a seal of servitude in its chest. The demon immediately begins protesting because it doesn't want to serve a lowly human, but the seal is already active, and it inflicts intense pain every time the demon tries to rebel against Errol, so he has no choice but to obey him. 6 months later, the headmasters of all 6 schools are having a meeting to discuss the new budget for the upcoming year, but the headmaster of the Black Institute gets up in a rage because he doesn't think it's fair that his budget is being cut by 60% since he won't be able to do any proper research with an amount like that. However, the representative tells Blag that his institute has failed to produce any meaningful results that contribute to the Magic City, so it's natural that his budget is being cut. All the other headmasters start making fun of Blag and call him a weirdo for dedicating so much time to black magic. The headmaster of the White Institute even tries to convince the city representative to consider banning black magic altogether, but the rep says he has no intention of doing that. He's simply here so they can proceed with budget allocation, so he asks if there are any more objections, but everyone seems to be in agreement, so he says the budget will be finalized following the results of the magic tournament. All the headmasters get up to leave, but Blag is still frozen in place because he can't believe his institute's budget is being cut by so much. The rep tells him that glaring isn't going to solve his problem, and if he really wants to increase his institute's budget, then he needs to prove the value of black magic during the magic tournament. In fact, if the Black Institute manages to win, he promises not to cut the Black Institute's budget at all, but that's only if the Magic Institute can win. That same day, Errol and his friends are walking through the streets, and he wonders why everyone is putting up so many decorations. Kufa can't believe Errol hasn't heard of the festival yet when it's one of the biggest events held in the Magic City. Errol never really paid much attention to festivities like this, but he has heard of the Institute Tournament, which is the festival's main event. In fact, all the headmasters have asked him to participate in the rookie segment, but he hasn't decided which school he wants to represent yet, so he will be meeting with them tomorrow morning to discuss it. Meanwhile, that night, in a desperate attempt to secure victory for himself in the tournament, Blag spends a lot of time creating a magic circle that connects to the demon realm, and from it, he summons a high-level demon known as Gluttony. He intends to use it to prove how useful black magic is, but all of a sudden, the slime betrays and swallows him whole. The next morning, the rookie segment of the competition is about to begin, and the headmasters all seem confident that they are going to win because they all apparently recently got a new student who is extremely strong. However, when Errol arrives for the meeting, they all call out to him at the same time and claim he is their star student. The headmasters are all confused because they had no idea that Errol was attending more than one institute at once, but before they could question him, they suddenly hear a huge commotion over by the festival, and it looks like it was caused by the slime, which is currently devouring a bunch of monsters and making its way towards the students now. They all start running for their lives, and Errol and the headmasters can see that the situation is really bad, so they agree to put the meeting on hold and rush off to help the students. One of the Red Institute students tries to hold the slime back by blasting it with fire, but his spells don't do much damage to it, and the slime looks like it's about to swallow him whole. Fortunately, Down swoops in and flies him out of harm's way, but Errol's friends aren't so lucky. As they are running, Kali accidentally trips over her feet and face plants in the dirt, allowing the slime to catch up, but Kato and Kufa don't intend to leave her behind. So Kufa casts an ice wall spell to block the slime's path and buy time. But that trick wasn't very effective because the slime simply smashed through the wall in an instant. Kato then steps in and tries the new spell he learned from copying Errol, a modified eruption blast, and it does stall the slime for a second, but it is otherwise unharmed, so there's nothing they can do to defeat it. The slime launches its tentacles at the kids, but before any of them could be absorbed, Errol shows up and slices the tentacles to pieces. The rest of the headmasters are here as well, and they tell the kids that they've got this covered, so they should all evacuate to City Hall immediately. Kali and the others understand and immediately start running away, and Errol asks the headmasters if they are sure they want him to leave as well. The headmasters tell him they'll be fine because they possess supreme classes. Since they are so confident, Errol agrees to evacuate and flies away, leaving the headmasters to deal with the slime on their own. But that said, they aren't actually sure how to deal with it. This is the kind of thing Blag would usually have info on, but they have no idea where he is, so they'll have to figure it out by themselves. From what they saw earlier, it looks like the slime is immune to the effects of magic, but just to make sure, White and Blue both fire their strongest spells at it to see what happens. To their surprise, the slime comes out completely unharmed, and at this point they aren't sure what to do. The Red and Green headmasters decided to try combining their spells since wind magic makes fire stronger, but even though their attack was incredibly powerful, it still did absolutely no damage to the slime. And in fact, it looks like the slime actually grew bigger after getting hit. The slime tries to attack them with more of its tentacles, but Yellow blocks it with an earth wall and then boxes the slime in to buy them some time. The slime will break out eventually, so they'd all need to come up with a strategy soon. They'd all now realize that the slime isn't simply immune to magic, it is capable of absorbing magic and using it to make itself stronger, but magic is the only thing they know how to use, so they don't have many options here. Red suggests that they might be able to overwhelm it by attacking all at once to do some damage, but White says that's too risky since they might end up making it a lot stronger. The slime soon breaks out of the box, and Errol has been watching the whole situation unfold from the sky. He is a little disappointed with the headmasters since he was hoping to see them use a few unique spells or something, but everything they have done so far is stuff that his dad already taught him, so it looks like there's nothing left for him to learn in this city. Ma Ti asks him if he's really just going to watch them fight from over here, but the headmasters did tell him they could handle it, so he wants to see what they can do. Ma Ti tells him that defeating a gluttony slime is no easy feat because those things are really troublesome, but he's surprised to see one outside the demon realm. Errol realizes that Ma Ti knows something about the slime, so he tells him to spill all the details. Ma Ti reveals that the gluttony slime is a special kind of monster that is able to absorb anything it comes across. It particularly likes mana, so Ma Ti thinks the headmasters are stupid for hitting it with so much magic since they are only making it stronger. Aurel is curious and asks if physical attacks would work on it, and technically, it should be vulnerable to those kinds of attacks, but the slime would probably absorb whatever weapon you try to hit it with. Errol then asks if, theoretically, a spell that's too powerful to absorb or strikes that are too fast for the monster to react would do the trick, and there's no reason it shouldn't. So Aurel creates a sword using his alchemy and heads off to confront the slime. The headmasters all watch helplessly as the slime makes its way into the city, and since their magic is completely ineffective, they are low on options. The slime is headed right for the center of the city, so the only thing they can do is evacuate everyone ahead of time, but just then, Aurel comes flying down from the sky and hits the slime with a magic sword slice. Ma Ti is surprised that Errol actually managed to cut through the slime, but it was able to reform itself a second later, so he is going to have to try something else. Just then, the headmasters show up, and they are all shocked because they had no idea that Errol knew how to use a sword so well. They assume he must be a magic swordsman, but Errol corrects them and explains that he is actually classless, though they don't believe him because that sounds way too crazy. Errol tells them that they need to get out of here because the slime grows stronger by absorbing mana. The headmasters already realized that their magic wasn't working against it, but if the slime specifically targets mana, then it must be heading for the city hall because it wants to devour the mana and all the students gathered there. Errol tells the headmasters to go protect the students, and at first, they are hesitant to leave Errol alone to face the slime. But right now, he's the only one who can damage it, so they have him a choice. Errol hits the slime with an infinite break attack, cutting it into dozens of small pieces, but the slime still manages to reform its body. It may not be taking damage, but the slime has realized that it'll be a major hassle to continue fighting Errol, so it tries to run away. But Errol doesn't intend to let it escape, so he creates a box around it, and at the top, he creates 4 golems to help him test a theory. With the slime trapped in there, he instructs the golems to follow his lead and proceeds to hit it with a quadruple infinite break. But even with the slime reduced to millions of pieces, it is still able to reform its body and begins trying to climb out of the box. So far, sword strikes haven't done much against the slime, so Errol decides to try using magic, but Ma-Ti finds this hilarious because Errol already knows magic doesn't work against it, so he must be getting desperate. However, Errol thinks he just needs to use a form of magic that the slime can't absorb. Ma-Ti has no idea what Errol is talking about, but in the next moment, Errol proceeds to create magic circles of all 6 different types and combines them to form one ultimate spell. He had hoped he wouldn't have to do this, but he has no other choice in this situation. He learned this spell from his dad, and during the process, Leon explained that the elimination spell is extremely difficult to control because it combines circles from all the different magic types, and he encouraged Errol to avoid using it if possible because a single slip-up during casting would destroy both him and anything within a mile radius. Errol has completed the casting process, but he's starting to realize that he may have underestimated how hard it would be to maintain the spell because his mana reserves are about to be depleted, and if that happens, it will be the end for him. However, before Errol could lose control, he suddenly received an influx of mana from the headmasters and all the students gathered in the town hall. This is all they can do to help at this point, and thankfully, the mana they provided was enough to keep Errol going, so he successfully completes the spell and completely destroys the slime from existence, along with a large section of the city. Errol returns to the ground now that the fighting is over, and he is starting to feel the effects of overexerting himself, but he should be fine after getting some rest. Soon after, the headmasters all land next to Errol, and they are all in disbelief that he was actually able to use the legendary annihilation spell because only mage lords are capable of such a feat. They all ask him if he is a mage lord, but Errol denies it and assures them that he really is classless. But his dad is the one who taught him the annihilation spell, and he happens to be a mage lord. Red is shocked to hear that Errol's dad is a mage lord, and the only mage lord he knows of is a man named Leon, so he asks Errol if that's who he's talking about. Errol is surprised that Red knows who his dad is, but Red says there's no way he could forget since he and Leon used to be classmates years ago, and Leon was so amazing that everyone thought he would become headmaster one day, but he ended up quitting the Red Institute after 1 year. The other headmasters also recall seeing Leon at their institutes for a year, after which he would suddenly disappear, and Errol has an idea of what was going on. His dad once mentioned that he attended every magic institute one after the other, so he probably just quit once he had learned everything each school had to offer. Since Errol learned how to use magic from Leon, the headmasters ask him if that means he knows the secret to becoming a mage lord, and from what Errol's dad told him, the secret is to master all 6 types of magic, which is devastating news for the headmasters because they were all convinced that they would advance if they focused on learning only one type. They have a lot more questions for Errol, but before they know it, he has run off on his own, and we find him searching through the rubble of the crater he created. Earlier, when he was chopping the slime into tons of pieces, he recalls seeing one of the small pieces fly over here, so he finds it and picks it up. He could annihilate it right now to make sure the slime is gone for good, but then again, this thing could turn out to be useful, so he decides to form a master-servant contract with it, and the next day he puts it to work as a portable garbage disposal system. Just then, Kato and the others barge into his room and ask if he really plans to leave the City of Magic for good. Errol explains that there's nothing left for him to do here, so it would be pointless for him to stay, but he promises to come visit them every once in a while. They ask him what he plans to do when he leaves, so he tells them he's going to go home first since his family is probably worried about him by now, but after that he's going to head over to the City of Monsters because he just got himself a new familiar and he'd like to research it. Meanwhile, the board director is having a panic attack over the fact that Errol is leaving the city, because if he had stayed, it wouldn't have raised the reputation of the City of Magic 10 times over. The headmaster tells him there's nothing they can do since Errol has every right to leave if he wants to, and even if they wanted to force him to stay, none of them are strong enough to beat him in a fight. All of a sudden, Blag speaks up and tells everyone that there's no need to worry, since now that they know a mage needs to master all 6 types of magic to become a mage lord, they just need to work together to train a new one. That sounds like a good idea, but the others haven't gotten over the fact that Blag is a ghost now. He explains that the slime devoured his physical body, but he used black magic to preserve his spirit, so he's still able to move around freely as a ghost, though he conveniently leaves out the fact that he was the one who caused it in the first place. This was the end of episode 11. Subscribe to not miss the next part.